Greetings, everyone, and welcome to our Market Performance and Planning Forum. My name is Brenda Corona. On behalf of the Stakeholder Affairs, we welcome you to our quarterly forum for today. We are excited to kick things off for today's forum, in which we will be presenting on a number of topics. And these topics have been communicated via an agenda a week ago. As well, we posted our slides a few days ago to our miscellaneous on our user group and reoccurring webpage. For today's meeting, we will be looking into topics with treatment of exports and wheels of summer 2023, performance and storage resources after enhancements, and system performance during the October eclipse. During the agenda, you'll see a lot of where those topics will be. So those topics will most likely happen within the 1 p.m. Pacific time frame. But before we get started, let's go with the first housekeeping reminders, as this quarterly forum is to engage stakeholders in review of market performance issues in a high-level dialogue on release planning, implementation, and new market enhancements. This is intended to foster open dialogue and sharing ideas and perspectives, so feel free to send us any chat or verbal questions or comments. We will be monitoring that. As a reminder, this call is being recorded and informational and convenience purposes only. Any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. So we are having a longer time for this meeting, so please feel free to keep comments brief so we can make sure we can go through all our topics and slides for today. As well, for today's instructions to ask a question, we do have that raise hand icon located on the lower toolbar on the lower part of your screen. When you hear a beep sound, it will say that you're unmuted. Please make sure to state your full name and affiliation so we know who's speaking. And also don't mute yourself when you are speaking and asking a follow-up question to what you asked, because it will mute you. If you do experience any technical issues during the call, Michelle is my event producer for today, and she will wonderfully help out as much as we can and also manage any questions through chat. So feel free to ask any questions. And as a quick summary of the objective for this forum is that we review market performance topics, and especially we are aware for the 2024 release plans as well, wrapping up 2023. Trang will go over that in more detail. I know we did have that release user group a few days ago, so we also have that recording posted. So other than that, we will go ahead and show our agenda that we posted a week ago for today. Kicking things off from 11 to noon, we will have policy update with Jillian from the market strategy and governance, and Trang will take the other half hour for project management release planning. And during the 1 to 4 p.m., we will do our best to get through all the topics listed here: treatment of exports, wheels in summer 2023, performance and storage resource after enhancements, system performance during the October eclipse, load performance, assistant energy transfer, and then general market performance. Will be brought to you by the Market Performance Advanced Analytics and Short-Term Forecasting. So with that, I will go ahead and introduce Jillian, and Michelle, go ahead and feel free to help me out move those slides. But thanks so much for joining, and we look forward to this meeting.
Good morning. Thank you, Brenda, and thank you for the whimsical clip art on the presentation. That's really fun and kind of getting in the holiday spirit. I hope everyone else is as well. We can go and dive right into the next slide. So starting out with our flagship initiatives, the extended day-ahead market and day-ahead market enhancements. We're looking forward to receiving a FERC order on these on 12/21, so just 1 week away. Definitely watching closely at FERC and looking forward to their feedback on that filing. We're making plans for implementation working groups starting in fall of 2024. Amazing that that is just next year. And in anticipation of our spring 2026 go live. So a little bit of waiting, but definitely looking forward to that FERC order. We can go to the next slide. Transmission services and market scheduling priorities, otherwise known as the Wheeling Initiative. We're also waiting. We're also, have some waiting to do on this one, although we did receive on October 30th FERC approval of phase 1 of the tariff, and we're currently undertaking tariff development for phase 2. that phase 2 effort is focused on extending the work that was done in phase 1 to establish long-term wheel-through priorities. And in the interim, working on phase 1 implementation and communicating those timelines and all that functionality with stakeholders as we go through the implementation process. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Thank you. On energy storage enhancements. So just an update here that, there was a tremendous implementation effort here. There was a fall software release of which ESE Track 2 software was successfully implemented. That's focused on state of charge, exceptional dispatch, as well as co-located resource, aggregated capability constraint, and the state of charge consideration of regulation. So some pretty nuanced, difficult implementation, but it's been successfully implemented, and we're looking forward to working with those changes in place. We can go on to the next slide, which is ancillary service state of charge constraint. This one's sort of been lurking for us for a little bit following the September 19th tariff amendment regarding the AS state of charge requirement that the constraint that was put in due to issues with uplift payments. We're looking ahead to Q1 of next year, 2024, with a straw proposal to examine any potential additional changes needed to make sure that that AS state of charge requirement is being met. Okay, next slide, please. All right, EDAM ISO BAA participation rules, sort of a mouthful, but recall this initiative focused on the development of rules for the ISO as a balancing authority area to participate in the extended day-ahead market on day 1. We're awaiting FERC approval. The tariff language was filed a month ago, but a lot of the changes that will be implemented as a result of this, that came out of this initiative will be actually done through the BPM change process. So we're looking forward to those processes starting in 2024. Okay, we can go to the next slide, Michelle. Thank you. All right, day-ahead sufficiency. This is a brand new initiative focused on evaluating the ISO's daily processes, really looking to make sure that the ISO as a participating BAA in EDAM meets those RSE obligations. And a first stakeholder meeting is right around the corner on December 18th, and if you haven't seen it yet, go look for that issue paper, which was published December 5th. All right, next slide. Thank you. Rules of conduct enhancements. We wrapped up the first phase, which focused on rules around meter data penalties. It was approved by the WEIM governing body and ISO Board of Governors in September. And the tariff language on this is under development. We don't have pardon me, dates yet for track 2. Those are forthcoming. But there were, there were myriad different issues to tackle as part of the rules of conduct enhancements, and not all of them got done in phase 1. So, we have a sort of a phased approach so that next phase will get kicked off soon. So stay tuned on that one, and we can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Reliability demand response resources, minimum runtime. So this is a real compressed short timeline initiative in response largely to a CPUC order. We're enthusiastic about this. It's going to extend the minimum on time for RDRR resources. And what that'll do, it'll be a longer window that will enable them to be more effectively dispatched and used by the market. This is a change we're looking forward to and anticipate taking it to the Board of Governors and WEM governing body in February. All right, move forward. Thanks. All right, so generation deliverability methodology review is really focused on responding to, industry concerns with access to deliverability for resources that are seeking to compete in the procurement process. Starting back in August, there was a straw proposal. Last month, a draft final proposal and a stakeholder meeting to discuss. We were looking toward having a Board of Governors meeting. I believe they discussed at the Board of Governors meeting this morning. I wasn't able to tune in for all of it. Approval wasn't necessarily needed for these responses to these industry concerns, but it's definitely an important initiative to provide a forum for those current concerns to be lodged and examined and responded to. So we can go to the next slide on interconnection process enhancements, track 2. This is really in furtherance of those efforts to enhance the CAISO's generation interconnection and deliverability allocation procedures. So this particular track 2, focuses on targeted modifications to the interconnection process. And we are targeting the May Board of Governors meeting for approval of those changes. Okay, we can go ahead. As you know, we have a series of working groups underway that are looking at, several different aspects of market policy and issues that have come up to really delve into problem statements and work with stakeholders to, form a good base from which to launch into the actual policy development process. One of those is, of course, the Greenhouse Gas Coordination Working Group. These efforts continue and will culminate in the GHG action plan. And again, that's in the intent of that is to inform a policy initiative once all of the various complex issues that go into that policy are really explored and vetted with the whole stakeholder community. Want to give a plug for speakers. The working groups are really eager to have stakeholders present at those meetings, and the next meeting is in the new year for the GHG working group on January 11th. So please email Isabella Nicosia. Her email address is right there. If you are interested in presenting, I know that would be that would really enhance the working group process, and they're looking forward to that. Okay, we can go on to the next one. All right, gas resource management working groups. Again, continuing on, there have been quite a few meetings for this upcoming window, December through February, continuing with problem statement data analysis. We're getting into the actual data side of it now, and identifying feasible solutions, which will feed into a March issue paper / straw proposal. And that should say March 2024. That's a typo. Apologies for that. And we can go to the next slide. Great. And resource adequacy working groups. A lot of working groups going on. I know it takes a lot of time from folks, but it's just been a really great process for delving into these deep issues and getting everybody kind of really fluent in the policy concerns. So this has been, I think this has been well received, although it does take a lot of time. The ISO has hosted 3 RA working group meetings so far, and facilitated 2 workshops on interoperability with the CPUC's slice of day reform, which is a big hurdle. The idea is to have this effort culminate in an action plan to really bridge the working group effort into the policy development process again, and sort of sequence those RA reforms. as with the GHG working groups, they're really looking forward to having stakeholder participation in terms of actual presentations for the RA working groups. And if you are interested in doing so at the next January 16th working group meeting, the facilitator is Jeff McDonald, and his email address is there. So for your convenience, please email him. We can go on to the next slide. Finally, we have the price formation enhancements working groups. These have been going on for a while. We expect them to be divided into 3 phases as there are so many things to tackle and they're so complex. There have been 9 working group meetings held to date. We had one on December 12th, and so that line there that says next working group meeting on December 12th is a function of preparing slides in advance, so my apologies for that. But we are looking forward to a phase 1 straw proposal in 2024, and that phase 1 again will cover issues around scarcity pricing enhancements, BAA level market power mitigation, and of course everybody's favorite fast start pricing in the CAISO markets and analysis of that. All right. I think the next slide is my last. Can we move forward one? Yes. All right, and then we have a relatively compact process to really make some changes to the policy initiatives catalog and roadmap process. They're not earth-shattering changes, but I think that there are some important ones, and they really have the goal of transparency and enabling more timely and effective inclusion of stakeholder input and prioritization in that catalog process. So we're aiming to put out a short document to kind of describe that. I know we've had a stakeholder meeting, but just to kind of codify it in terms of an actual paper, that should come out shortly here. But then the thing to really look forward to on this one is a level setting meeting that we'll have at the end of January, where we'll really go through we'll kick off this new process where we are, you know, trying to frame catalog submissions from stakeholders in terms of strategic goals, and really get that fresh submission of items to, you know, start a prioritization process in the early days of spring next year. So definitely, please keep this on your calendar. We look forward to having you at that level setting meeting at the end of January. And with that, I think that is my last slide. I'm happy to take any questions, or else I can turn it over to Trang.
There are currently no questions in queue.
Okay, if questions come up later, please feel free to contact me or work through stakeholder affairs. We're happy to take your questions if something occurs to you after the fact. Happy holidays, everyone.
All right. Good morning. This is Trang Vo, Release Manager at the ISO and the Project Management team. And thank you for joining for the release plan update also. And thanks, Jillian, for the great policy update that kind of segues nicely into the release update. I did have the last release user group of the year on Tuesday. And then with this release plan update, we do have some incremental changes that I want to highlight since this past Tuesday's meeting. And this will be the last formal release plan update of the year with the next release user group on January 9th. All right, so let's go ahead to the next slide, Michelle. All right, so we have our release plan summary and agenda for today. We'll just have a quick reminder on release communication. Our independent 2023 releases are wrapped for the year with the final 2 items or significant efforts that you see here for CMRI RTD schedule data change that went into production November 29, and then with the activation and effective date of the variable O&M cost review on December 1st. So as we shift our focus into next year, we have the summer 2024 release for Transmission Service and Market Scheduling Priorities Phase 2, as well as the Transmission Exchange Agreement. And we have some independent 2024 items on the horizon for implementation even early in January and into February that we have in progress now. So one of the significant items is the URL and IP changes, as well as the AUP changes associated with that for the application delivery resiliency effort. We do have some minor changes there that I want to go over, as well as some points to reemphasize for that effort. For the transmission register system upgrade, we have that market simulation in progress with production planned in the middle of January. And then for RSEE Phase 2 Track 2, we have market simulation planned for January and the activation targeted for February 21st. Later on in the year, we have efforts for hybrid resources Phase 2C for RIM, the CRR system upgrades, the CAISO website replacement, and then Tracks 1 and 2 for FERC 881. And then in spring of 2026, we have the activations for DAME, EDAM, as well as the EDAM ISO BA participation rules track A, EDAM onboarding for PAC and Likely Bank, and then WEIM BHE Montana's onboarding as well. All right. So let's go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so we did shift our communication for releases and market simulation queries or inquiries. In cities now, you'll submit cities with the functional environment of release or market simulation for items related to those areas. And then you also have the option to send an email to release@CAISO.com for release matters, as well as the existing marketsim@CAISO.com email for market sim topics. All right, so let's go ahead to the next slide. We'll jump into TSMSP2 on the next slide. All right, so if we could go one more to the milestones, please. Okay, so this is what we have for TSMSP2. We do have a BRS that's in progress now that we plan to post very shortly. I anticipate that in January. And then in February, we have the settlements config guide to be made available on the 12th. We will have tech spec changes here, notably for OASIS and potentially other systems as well. So we'll provide more details in the future technical user groups and release user groups going forward. Jillian did speak a little bit about the tariff activities, and you can see what's been completed. And then the next tariff milestone or significant milestone will be the Track 2 filing targeted for Q1 of 2024. All right, and then we'll have various DPM changes as part of this, and then the PRR schedule is being finalized, and then as we have the dates for each of the PRRs, we will populate this information and communicate that out to our stakeholders. Production activation for summer 2024 release is June 1st of 2023. All right, so let me go through this next slide for TEA, and then we can take a pause for questions. For summer 2024, we also have the Transmission Exchange Agreement. No change to the scope here, so we'll go on to the next slide. The deliverables here, where applicable, do align with TSMSP2 as they're part of the summer 2024 release. So the external BRS planned by January is what we're targeting. And then we have settlements config guides that will be included in the same publication, February 12th, with TSMSP2. We do have text spec changes anticipated here as well, and then a settlements and billing PRR that's upcoming. And then the production activation for this for summer 2024 lies on June 1st, 2024. All right, So I want to take a pause. I do see a question in the chat about the variable O&M cost review. So Andrew, if you, so on the release, on the RUG meetings and events, you can go to the previous presentation for the RUG last month where it shows the variable O&M description and milestones, as well as the filings and the BPM changes that are associated. I'll take a note down to send you that information to that link, Andrew, but for now, if you want to go ahead and navigate to the CAISO.com page under meetings and events and release user group, you'll be able to see a presentation from November that has that information. We also did send a notice out in the last week of November for that too. So if you go out to CAISO.com and look under market notices, you'll see one published in the end of November that also refers to that implementation. Okay. Right, so I hope that helps. Okay, thank you, Brenda, for sending the link as well. Okay, and then I have, looks like another question. For TSMSP, if we could explain when the phase 1 short-term will be implemented and when phase 2 long-term is expected to be implemented. So that is a good question. We are tracking the 2 different phases, but right now we don't have a firm schedule for that. I think Jillian mentioned it in her policy update, and then even for my release update, I don't have that broken out yet because we're still working through the schedule details on that. So you can stay tuned for more information in the future release user group, as well as when we provide the BRS, it will show the distinction between those 2 implementations, and then we'll have the schedule published for those different phases when where we have more certainty on that. Okay. All right. I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to go ahead and move to the next section, please. Oh, sorry. Steve has a follow-up question about phase 1 needing to be implemented by June 1st. That is our target, and that's why you see that in the summer 2024 release for TSMSP2, and we're actually looking to see to finalize that schedule, because at this point we are targeting sooner than June 1st. For phase 1 for TSMSP2, but by June 1st is our target. All right. Thanks, Steve. Okay, please do let us know if you have other questions on that. Okay. So, Michelle, I think we can go forward now into the next section for independent 2024 releases. Go to the next slide, please. Okay, so we do have a significant UI and API URL and IP change underway that has been in progress for quite some time. And I wanted to talk about the API transition and then also just a reminder on the UI changes. So we know that the API transition is could be very impactful too. So we want to give some reminders about how to minimize the impact on this transition. So let's go to the next slide. All right, so this is a lot of information here, but it does reflect on market notice that was sent out previously with a minor change. So we are implementing the API transition for the new URLs in a couple different phases. Phase 1 is complete, which makes available the new APIs and new infrastructure. That was complete as of November 15th. So from customer action, those that are using the API are encouraged to cut over to the new API URLs in production as soon as possible. And then for phase 2, we have a transition and update to the existing URLs for the APIs in production, where we will not change the URL, but the underlying infrastructure. That was planned on January 9. And as we are working with customers on a few of their observations and making sure that they have a smooth transition, we have shifted that phase 2 date to January 17. And we'll continue to work with the customers that are doing the testing and any that are having any hurdles to work through that and then go from there to make sure that we're ready for the January 17 date. Okay. So let's go to the next slide. All right. Okay, so this is just more information there. And then an emphasis that I wanted to make here is that on the new URLs that are available now, as well as after January 17th for the existing URLs, there are additional changes that are needed. So not only do we have new infrastructure and new IPs, but there's also a new certificate authority for the servers that will need to be configured on the customer side, as well as a service level acceptable use policy for CMRI, DRS, and MRIS APIs. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. All right, so this is just a diagram to show the different phases through the implementation. So the only update here is that again, the second phase will be January 17, and we want to just reemphasize that our guidance and recommendation is for customers to all cut over to the new production URLs as soon as possible prior to January 17, 2024. And you can test the new APIs now and continue to let us know if there are any issues, and we will coordinate some discussions with the ISO team and the customers that are having any issues to ensure that the readiness for this cutover on the final cutover on January 17th. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so this shows the new URL format as well as the old URL and kind of walks you through the different phases that we had. And then it provides a little bit more detail about the dependencies for the new URLs as well as the new infrastructure on the IP, the certificate authority, the acceptable use limit, and the additional application protections. So let's go to the next slide. All right, so this is the same information with the addition of the applications that are impacted. So you'll see that ADS and OASIS are not on this list because ADS and OASIS have already been cut over to the new infrastructure. So these are the remaining APIs that will be impacted on January 17th. All right, let's go forward again. Okay, so we have received a lot of questions about the certificate authority, and so just wanted to remind folks too that with using the new API or the new API infrastructure will require that the 2 new Entrust root certificates are added to your trust stores on your application servers. So let's go to the next slide. This is an example of what that will look like when it's configured on your servers. And if we go to the next slide, please. These are some questions that we've received about this. I think the big takeaway here is that customers can take action now to add these 2 new certificates to your certificate trust store. And it's just an addition, so it doesn't impact anything now. You're able to set that up now. And then the second emphasis that I want to make is this does not impact user certificates. So the user certificates are undergoing a separate transition from Verizon to Entrust as they expire, but this change is specific just to application servers. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. All right, and here is an important reference too for those that need to set up the new Entrust certificates. You can get those from these links, these 2 links here. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, so that covers the API changes. There's a lot of information there, but we're happy to continue to take questions via Citi and or email about those, and then we'll continue to do outreach with our customers and schedule any technical discussions with your teams that are having any issues with the new URLs in production. So we do have the UI cutovers as well, which are a little less impactful, and you'll see that most of the UIs are already available in production. And on January 18, we will be shutting down the old UI URLs. So our recommendation is always to access the application's UIs via the various portals, and the portals will be updated to have the new UI URL only after that cutover. So, all right, let's go on to the next 2024 item. Okay, so we have this transmission register system upgrade. So the only update here is that the market simulation that started November 27, we have extended that to January 5, just to give a little bit more time over the holiday for those that had some questions that we've since clarified to continue their testing. Production is on track for January 19th. 2024 for this upgrade, and you will receive, TR users will receive specific communication as we get closer to the production implementation, just to confirm that schedule and timeline. Go on to the next slide, please. All right, we have RSEE Phase 2 Track 2, which is our most significant market sim effort that's on the horizon, the short-term horizon right now. So let's go to the next slide. And one more to the milestones, please. Okay, so this effort does have market simulation scenarios. So there are 4 scenarios, 3 unstructured and then 1 structured. And we anticipate being able to start that full market simulation in January. We're targeting January 8th, and to run through that whole month for the production activation February 21st. So this has come up in the past that the market sim start has been shifted. We anticipated starting in December, and that's now moved to January. However, at this time, starting the market simulation and supporting that through January does still give us a path to production activation on February 21st. We will reevaluate that after the final start of market simulation and communicate out if there's any other adjustments. Okay, so let's go on to the next effort, please. Okay, and then we can go to further one slide, the milestone. Okay, hybrid resources phase 2C for the RIMS items. The information is available in the current version of the BRS. We do anticipate minor revision to the external BRS coming up next year. And for this one, there are still no settlements changes and no tech spec. However, for the market sim that is listed as NA, we do plan to offer unstructured market simulation for these RIMS changes. So there will be more information to come out on that. And the production activation is planned for Q3 or Q4 of 2024. Go on to the next slide, please. All right. And then we can go advance to the milestone table on this one as well, please. If we could go one more. Okay, thank you. Okay, so for CRR, we did have the last customer partnership group meeting yesterday, December 13, and that covered the newest timeline there. And there's a link to the CPG that's available on the CAISO website. It has the materials and recording from that meeting. So if that interests you, please refer to those materials. The next CPG is planned tentatively for January 2024. So that's the only update that I have here. Let's advance forward. I think we covered the schedule and the last rug. This is a visual of that information for you. And again, this was gone over in detail at the customer partnership group yesterday. And I guide you to refer to those materials for more information. All right. Then we can go forward, please. Okay. And then again, the recording is linked here for the last CPG yesterday. And then we look forward to the next one in January. So let's go ahead and move on. Okay. We have FERC 881. You'll see one slide here so far, but as I indicated in the summary, we will have multiple tracks for this, with track 1 and 2 planned for implementation in 2024. You'll see that we had the tariff activities listed here, the last one being the FERC acceptance of our filing ER 2022-2362 on April 20th. Okay, more information to come on this. All right, so let's go to the next section, please. All right, so we'll cover spring 2026 release and with a focus on DAME and EDAM. Okay, so we can go to the milestone slide for this one, please. One more. Thank you. Okay, so we do have a BRS revision that is on track for December 22nd, which will make some clarifications and clean up the document, as well as move some requirements from the DAME BRS to the EDAM BRS and vice versa. And then we will also be updating our requirements to match the file tariff and or clarify the policy. And then after that, in January, we'll have settlements config guides for the first set of charge codes published by January 16th of 2024. And then for the tariff activities, we did request a FERC response by December 21st for some of those items to be effective on the 21st, so we can start work on the agreement. And then for BPMs, these are the 4 that we anticipate changes to that will provide a forward schedule of once we have that defined. As Julia mentioned, the implementation working groups for DAME are planned to start fall of 2024. We have training anticipated for May of 2025, and then market simulation starting June of 2025, with production deployment in fall of 2025, and then production activation finally on April 2026. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this is a summary of the BRS revisions, just to give you a preview of the changes that are coming up in that BRS set to publish by next week. And once that is published, you can review the BRS for the latest, but this does show what we anticipate changing so far in that. All right, let's move on to EDAM on the next slide. Okay, so for EDAM, we did make some minor adjustments to this, just comparing it to the upcoming BRS revision for this as well. But generally the implementation details here remain the same. So let's go on to the next slide. All right, so the milestones, as many of you know, should align with the DAME milestones here. So again, we have a BRS revision plan for the end of this year, by December 29. The FERC response we've requested by December 21st. And with the December 21st effective date for the tariff changes for the EDAM agreements and onboarding provisions. And then we have the settlements config guides for January 16th for the first set of charge codes. We do have several tech specs that are on their way. By the end of this year and even this week, you'll receive or you'll be able to review the cyber tech spec for EDAM on the dev site, and then the rest are planned for Q1 of 2024. We're working on refining the schedule and for the remaining tech specs, and we'll provide more specific dates as we have them. And then for BPMs, you'll see several of those there that we'll work on a detailed schedule for and provide that at a later time. We do have training activities anticipated for this. And then the market simulation for EDAM onboarding will be September 2025 through January 16 of 2026, with production deployment in fall of 2025, and then production activation as well as onboarding in spring of 2026. All right, so let's go on to the next slide. All right. So EDAM ISO BA participation rules track A, you'll generally see this aligned also with the DAME and EDAM initiatives. And so right now, the next milestone that we're tracking so far is going to be the FERC response by February 15, 2024. And then again, this will be effective spring 2026 with EDAM. All right, let's go on to the next slide, please. All right, and then I believe this is the last slide that I have for the implementation so far. So we have the onboarding of WEIM for BHE Montana that will follow our normal timeline for WEIM onboarding. So the next significant milestone here for the implementation activities will be market simulation December 2025, and then parallel operations starting February 2026 for an activation in spring of 2026. All right. So let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so that takes me to the end of those presentations. If we can go forward one more, please. Actually, and then can we advance again? And next slide, please. All right, so again, the release user group for December 26th will be canceled, and then the next release user group update will be January 9, 2024. And then on the next slide, you'll also see the 2024 release user group full schedule. Thank you for Brenda for putting that together. Okay, so I'll stop this. This is the end of my update for today. I'll stop here for any final questions or comments.
Thank you, Trang.
I do not see any. Thank you.
I don't see any questions. Like Michelle mentioned, we have answered all the questions in chat. So if you did submit some other chat questions that we didn't see, let us know. I think we're good. Trang, is that the last slide you have?
Yes. Thank you, Michelle and Brenda and everyone on the call.
Great. Thank you, Trang. So at this time, we will be sharing the attendance list via chat. The attendees list will show you who's on the call. As well, we are going to click on, Michelle, if you can click on the break slide, we will be starting our next agenda item at 1 p.m. Guillermo and Amber Motley will be having their teams present at 1 p.m. Pacific time. So feel free to come back around 12:55. We will start at 1, but feel free to join us back at 12:55 just to have a 1 p.m. start time. So Michelle, feel free to show the break slide on the next, another attachment if you like. Thank you. I see it, and we will be sending that attendance list at this time. So feel free to review that. At this time, we will not have anything going on within the next hour. So enjoy your lunch break. Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to our Market Performance and Planning Forum. We will go ahead and resume for today our additional topics for the market analysis and analytics team and short-term forecasting. We will go ahead and bring a few folks who are on the panelist group, Guillermo, Jessica, Quinn, and Amber, who will be helping out present today's next and last section of today's forum. So go ahead, Guillermo, you have the floor.
Thank you, Brenda. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Thank you, and everybody, welcome to the MPPF for the second part. This is the time where we're going to be discussing overall items regarding the market performance. We have a very packed agenda. We have a few items that we want to spend some time going through and giving you an update. As usual, we have two parts of the material. The first part is regarding what I call the hot topics, timely items that we want to discuss with you, and they are ad hoc based on each MPPF session that we have. The second part is still kind of the similar metrics, standard metrics that we provide in every MPPF. Again, we don't expect to go through those. These are more for your information, but we expect to have enough time to be able to go through each of the hot topic items that we have expected for today. And with that, you are going to see that we have different members of the team that are going to be covering different areas of the material. So you will be listening to different people. And I will start with the first item. And this is the item regarding the summer conditions of 2023. You may recall that we just completed the effort of the analysis, and we have a dedicated discussion how things play for the summer. Indeed, at the end of the summer, we didn't generate the performance report for the month of September because it was basically done quite earlier. But in particular, we have some challenging conditions for the July timeframe. And this is the focus of this first topic. Although we came into the summer operations this year in better shape than last year, we have good hydro conditions, we have additional capacity on the system, and then we have the heat wave across the desert Southwest. And that was specifically in the second part of July. That put demands on the system that led to challenging operating conditions. Specifically, we have a few challenging days in the period of July 20 through the 26th. In those days is when the ISO indeed declared emergency conditions. The actions taken in coordination with neighboring balancing areas were needed to maintain grid reliability during these challenging days of July, when the system was stressed. As we have seen over the past few summers, the energy landscape is changing in the West, in part due to the transition to renewable resources. And the interdependencies between balancing areas are even more critical to maintain reliable operations across the wider footprint. And even though we have discussed this at length in the corresponding time, we understand that there may still be some questions about how things work during these days. And we're providing this update to give you some further explanation on key points of the summer 2023. And very specifically about the treatment of exports and wheel transactions in the ISO system. So with that preamble, let's start the discussion. Could we move to the next slide, please? We are one of the 38, 39 balancing areas in the West, and similar to any other balancing area in the West, the ISO takes actions to balance supply and demand on its system, and it's part of its role as a balancing area. And we adhere to the same NERC and FERC rules about exports, firmness, and load management within our area. In our role as a balancing area, and also as the market operator for the California system, the ISO is committed to working with our neighboring balancing areas. And this is for the sake to ensure efficient and economic dispatches in the region. As a balancing area, we have a finite amount of capacity, and we have a load obligation to maintain reliability within our area. There will be situations like those of July 2023, when there is not enough surplus energy to meet external demands. These circumstances materialize in late July, in the July 20, 25th, 26th period, when we have these high demands actually outside of the California balancing area. As you may have noticed, following through the different reports and information that we provide, there is increasingly a condition of becoming an exporter when we have plenty of solar production in the middle of the day. And as we go into the evening time frame, we become a net importer. After the solar production reduces in the evening, the ISO relies more on imports, including the imports that are secured through the resource adequacy program. At those times, the ISO is less likely to be able to support all types of exports and wheels bidding into the market. This is the critical time, given the tightness of the supply conditions that get further exacerbated during the summer period. It is a common practice in the industry to prioritize the different levels of energy transactions that can be accommodated during these strained conditions, when in reality, not all transactions can flow on the system. And it's important to understand how export transactions are prioritized and the distinction between the different types of exports that we have in the market construct for the California ISO. If we can move to the next slide, please. Here is where the distinction of the different types of exports is very relevant. In general, we have three types of exports. It is the high priority exports, the low priority exports, and we also have something like any typical supply and demand, that is economical exports. The relevance is more about the two types of self-scale priorities, low and high priorities. The ISO manages electricity exports with a distinction between these two, low and high priorities. And the ISO carefully manages all the exports, prioritizing, obviously, the ability to maintain the power balance and ensuring we meet our energy needs before allowing electricity to be exported as low priority. This is a nuanced approach, but allow us, the ISO, to balance the benefits of energy trading while maintaining the reliability of the system. Under our current tariff provisions, low priority exports are those that are sourced from available surplus supply from the ISO balancing area, and that the CAISO obviously can support as long as it is able to meet its own load requirements first. High priority exports, on the other hand, are sourced from resources within the balancing area that do not have such obligation and can sell their surplus capacity to external load serving entities. They are guaranteed this higher priority because it's contracted capacity. These high priority exports are actually treated with the same priority as the ISO native load. When we have these strained conditions, high priority transactions are treated equal to the ISO loads and have priority status that are likely to clear the market, even during these stress conditions. On the other hand, low priority exports are basically opportunity sales, economical sales, and the first to not clear if the market doesn't have sufficient supply. Similar to all other balancing areas with open access tariffs, the ISO can only clear low priority if there is enough capacity to serve its own load first, and that is basically under the current tariff provisions that we have. If we look at the past, when supplies were, I would say, enough, and the amount of exports were relatively low, there were very few cases where we have reductions of exports. However, as you can see in the last few years, with the growing demands and the tighter environmental conditions, we start to see more strained supply conditions, not only in the CAISO area, but also across the West. And the ISO has increasingly observed and advised market participants that exporters that such these opportunity sales shouldn't be relied on for reliability in other balancing areas during these stress conditions. The ISO has been transparent about the scaling priorities and rules that we have in place associated with how we treat these export transactions. And we have taken indeed steps to communicate through the market, through the information that we display, when conditions on the system are looking tight or when there is simply not enough supply to meet all the needs of the system, including these potential opportunity sales for low priority exports. Next slide, please. There is another type of transactions that are quite of similar interest in this conversation, and that has to do with the way they function through the market mechanism. We have what we call wheel-through transactions, or just wheels. These are pass-through transactions that goes through the transmission system of the ISO, going from or sourcing from one balancing area and sinking to another balancing area. These wheels do not add supply or demand to the CAISO system, but they utilize the transmission system, and in some cases there may be limited transmission capacity to allow all the transactions to flow. Under the current practices, market participants have the ability to designate wheels through in the transmission system of the CAISO as high priority if they are able to show that they have contracted supply to wheel through in the system. And that has to do with a process that we have in place that have to be registered 45 days in advance of the month. Otherwise, if they don't go through this registration, entities can still wheel through the ISO system, but in this case, these wheels through are going to be treated as low priority. It's the same construction that we have for exports, high priority and low priority. In that case, if we have low priority wheels through, the ISO may not be able to clear all of those if there is congestion that is limiting the ISO's ability to serve its load when we have limited available supply. Next slide, please. This is the basic construct of the scheduling rules and priorities that we have implemented in the market construct. If we evolve now the discussion into the summer conditions of July 2023, this was driven basically by an extreme heat wave in the West, and that put obviously a strain on the grid. We have higher demand, tighter supply conditions, not only in California, but also in many other balancing areas of the West. As a result, this summer the ISO observed increased reliance by neighboring balancing areas on these opportunity sales for exports, which are scheduled as low priority, especially during our net peak when some entities have been importing large quantities out of the market to meet their own load obligations, or even through these economical opportunities by means of bilateral market transactions. For instance, there may be these transactions that are the 6x16 blocks, right? That goes for 16 hours of the peak time. When we're in the middle of the day, these transactions can be easily met because we have plenty of solar production in surplus. But as we go into the evening peak, these transactions may not be sustainable and may strain our system during this tight, hot summer net peak period. And these economical or low priority export bids put into our market may not be able to be supported. Our ISO operators rely on the ISO market functions to operate the grid, and we act to ensure its balancing area has sufficient supply to meet our demands at all times. Just like any other operators in any other balancing area in the West would do the same under the similar conditions. Now, even though we have these very strained conditions during the July time frame, we were able to basically honor all the high priority transactions that were put into our system. Can we move to the next slide, please? When we refer to the summer 2023, it's more specific to certain days. We are really talking about the July 20, 25th, 26th condition, because these are the 3 days where we have to declare emergency, either a watch or an alert number 1. And in spite of all these conditions that were different severity of emergencies, the ISO was able to honor all the high priority exports and all the high priority wheels in either of these 3 critical days, even on the July 25th, when we experienced a significant amount of export reductions. Next slide, please. Can we go back 1 slide, please? Yeah, this one. During the emergency conditions, and specific to the July 25th, the ISO basically couldn't support the high volumes of exports that were built into its real-time market, and still be able to meet its own demand forecast and maintain the reserve capacity that we have to have in the system to deal with uncertainty. Due to these tight supply conditions, the ISO has actually to declare an energy emergency for its balancing area as we approach the evening time frame when we have the most critical period, that is the net load. If you look at this trend, on July 25th, we reduced up to 4,800 megawatts of either economically bid or low priority self-scheduled exports from the CAISO balancing area that could not be supported in our what we call hour ahead scheduling process. This is the HASP process. And this is the process that is the last opportunity to clear hourly intertie transactions. And that simply meant that the system didn't have enough surplus power available to fulfill these opportunity sales. There are many different ways to break down this capacity. You can see that the dominant color is low priority from the day ahead. And there is a volume in purple that also belongs to low priority wheels. Again, these are low priorities. All the high priority exports and high priority wheel through were indeed honored. When we go into deeper understanding of which exports were reduced, there were over 1,300 megawatts out of these 4,800 megawatts that were low priority exports and wheel through transactions that were flowing to the Desert Southwest entities, and they could not be supported. Some of these wheeling transactions were indeed bidding incorrectly by scheduling coordinators as low priority. They were properly registered as high priority, but when it came to bidding into the market, either the day ahead or the real time, they were incorrectly bidding as low priority. And therefore, the market is going to see those as low priority and they were reduced. And let's move to the next slide, please. These export reductions were very targeted and very surgical for 2-3 critical hours of July 25th around the net load peak. This illustration indeed shows you the overall volume of exports that otherwise were able to be supported in any other hours of either July 25th or July 20 or 26 when we have the other emergency conditions. It is important to know that the ISO honored all these, in addition to honoring all these high priority exports and wheels, we were able to actually support these opportunity sales for low priority or even economical exports in the amount of up to 9,000 megawatts. These are unprecedented levels of exports that were bidding into the market, trying to secure capacity through these opportunity sales. If you have a reference of how much exports we have cleared in previous years, just looking back in the 2 most immediate years, this is twice as much as we experienced in 2021 or 2022. That just gives you a sense of how strained, how critical conditions were in the West to require to have such level of opportunity sales and bidding into the CAISO market to be able to support those in the real time. Next slide, please. This is another picture that illustrates the volumes of wheel-through transactions that came into the market and were able to clear in the market. They are broken down effectively in 3 groups, even though there is not much economical or is not high enough to be graphically visible in this plot for economical transactions. But the majority of the transactions were regarding either day-ahead priority or day-ahead low priority. Again, we were able to clear and honor all the high priority wheel-through transactions. The ones in blue belongs to the low priority. These are, again, opportunity sales. And you can see that there is a dip in the volume for July 25th in the net peak hours. That is the time when we also have to reduce some wheel-through transactions. Again, some of those were the ones bidding incorrectly as low priority exports and therefore were treated accordingly in the market as such. Next slide, please. As we start analyzing just in time how these emergency conditions evolve and the causes for those emergencies, we realize that there was kind of significant amount of what we call advisory EIM transfers coming into the CAISO in the HASP market. This is the hourly ahead process or either the 15-minute process. Like any other market in the real time, we also clear and project the amount of transfers that are going to be flowing between any pair of balancing areas. Specific to the CAISO, we were observing that there was a projection that there will be high volumes of import transfers coming into the CAISO area in the HASP market. But as we progress into the real-time conditions and we reach the balancing market, the 5-minute market, these advisory transfers didn't realize. If we were projecting to have, like in July 2015, this illustration, the one in red or gray, that was in the range of 2,000, 3,000 megawatts, and you compare how much indeed we realized in the real-time market, we're talking about easily 2,000, 3,000 megawatts of transfers that did not realize. And this is critical for the CAISO because when assessing the power balance in the HASP market, we assess how much internal supply has to be dispatched, complemented with imports, and how much exports can be actually supported with that supply condition. If eventually these advisory transfers do not realize, now we still have to honor the hourly intertie that were already clear in the previous market. And now it's creating a tighter supply condition for the balancing market to try to find out additional supply to offset that unrealized transfers coming into the market. And this is the dynamic that we first observed on July 20, and that continues for the subsequent days, even though in some of days we didn't call for energy emergencies. And the same dynamic and even more dramatic in pattern is shown for the July 25th. That's the reason that starting on July 26th, we took an action. If we move to the next slide, please. Effective July 26, in the evening of July 26, the ISO determined that we could not just count on the higher volumes of advisory transfers coming to the CAISO balancing area. And therefore, we started to limit the transfers into the ISO area. The transfers that we limited are what we call the dynamic transfers. These are the ones that are optimized in the HASP and the 15-minute market, and they can be re-optimized in the 5-minute market, and therefore they can change. We limit only the transfers coming into the ISO, but we still allow power to go out of the ISO based on the economics at that point in time. Limiting the transfer imports is actually a common practice that can be used by any of the Western energy balance market participants to manage the grid conditions. We have this practice of limiting the dynamic import transfers into the CAISO basically up to the first days of November, when we have the confidence that all the challenges that we observed through the summer were addressed and we were in better conditions. We may have to consider what conditions, what processes we may need to have for the upcoming summer, knowing that this is a dynamic that under the current market construct is still in place. This is the material we wanted to cover regarding the export wheels through limitation of the IM transfers that happened during the summer conditions. This is a good time to see if we have any follow-ups or questions. Michelle, Brenda.
All right. I don't see any questions in queue, but there are a couple in the chat. Do you happen to see them, Guillermo?
Sorry, I'm not seeing those. Let me see.
I can't see them either. Michelle, can you?
That's weird. You should be able to in your chat, but no problem.
I can certainly, yeah, for the person who asked about the raise hand function, it is working. You should be able to click on the raise hand, and it will put you in the queue. All right, so I see a chat from C.D. McLean, the CEC, California Energy Commission, and they said regarding slide 77, can the CAISO state the minimum and maximum observed net import position on these days? And then the chat after that says, the slide 79 gets closer to an answer to my previous question, but would need a trace of actual net imports. And then, all right, and then I see one more that says the host. Okay, you're saying you're not able to raise your hand? Okay, let me check that, guys, because you definitely should be able to raise your hand. But in any event, did you hear those questions, Guillermo?
Kind of, but I couldn't fully follow what the question was, Michelle. Can you read one by one, please?
Sure. Do you need me to reread it, you said?
Yes, please, one by one, so that we can tackle one by one.
All right. So the first one said, regarding slide 77, can the CAISO state the minimum and maximum observed net import position on these 3 days? And then the follow-up to that said, and that was from C.D. McLean from CEC, California Energy Commission. And then the follow-up question says, slide 79 gets closer to an answer to my previous question, but would need a trace of actual net imports.
Okay, I think I understand the question. I don't have a slide that covers the net scale interchange. I believe the question is, yes, we have this high level of of exports. Naturally, we have some level of imports. On top of that, we have some transfers going in or out. His question is really overall on net, what was CAISO position? We have plus 9,000 megawatts of exports. We may have 4,000 megawatts of imports, plus minus transfers. I don't have a slide right now to show that, but I suggest to check on the July market performance report that we did for the summer, because we have several of those metrics in there. Overall, it would have been a net export position, at least for these critical times, because of the level of exports that we have in the system were much higher than the overall imports coming into the system. For specific numbers, I would refer to the July report. Okay, do we have now any other? Okay, now I can see hands raised. Can we go with the first one, Brenda, Michelle?
Hey, Guillermo, this is Dan Williams from the Energy Authority. Great presentation as always, and happy to see the follow-up on this, even though it's kind of extending beyond when you did the initial summer review. So it's nice to see these kind of getting dug into, even at this point. A question I had is, was any notice given to the market, system operating message, anything like that, when this decision was made?
Thank you, Dan, for the question. I guess you are referring to the limitation of the transfers?
Correct, yeah.
Yes, there is a, how we call it, there is a system that we utilize to communicate, and yes, there is indeed a message. It's not a market notice, the formal market notice. There is a message system that is utilized to communicate that. Now, I think the critical question is going to be, what is the audience that this type of messages reach? I don't think these reach the public in general. It's more targeted to the entities participating in the market. I can give you the name of the system later through email, but yes, there is something that at least communicates that to the entities participating, and actually it's called the Everbridge notification, and it's specific to the EIM entities. So I guess your question is more about whether there is any communication to the public or to participants in general?
not so much the broad public, stakeholder community, et cetera, but just even on OASIS within system operating messages, I will just say it feels inappropriate for only some market participants to be aware of this versus others, and it may have led to some questioning why market results were shifting during these periods if they weren't aware of what was going on. I believe the DMM report will probably be looking at some of the market impacts of this from a price volume perspective, as it maybe impacted the HASP clearing for hourly block imports or exports. But I'm just kind of curious, we change one thing in the market and many other things, many other dominoes fall as a consequence of those decisions, and always fall on the side of wanting to see as much transparency / broadly distributing the information to make sure all market participants are aware of what's going on. Beyond that, I just was curious, is this, or has the ISO discussed any sort of policy discussion, any sort of changes that may be coming around business practices or areas where the drivers for this then get addressed in the future, or some policies developed so entities know kind of when this may or may not happen in the future, those sorts of things as kind of next steps from here. Is there a home for that at this point?
Okay, yeah, thank you, Dan, for your questions. Regarding the first item that you referred to, the item of transparency, I take your point. I think you're bringing a fair point of how can we ensure that this is known in a wider context to all market participants, and we will take this back and see how we can improve that area. Regarding the second point, yes, you are right. We understood the dynamics at that time such that we took actions. Now we have resumed, I would say, normal operations by not imposing those limitations anymore since early November. Internally, we are discussing how we are going to approach this. Some potential path could be a business practice change that we have to assess, potentially depending on the solution that we may pursue or explore. That may put us in the swim lane of a potential policy initiative. We're still in internal discussions how we are going to approach this item. So there will be at least some process or BPM changes to address this. Whether it reaches the level of a policy initiative, that is still to be seen. And you also raised the comment about the market implications. Yes, we did see the implication right away. And naturally, what is going to happen and what we have seen is that by the time we start imposing the limitations on the import transfers, we are somehow isolating the ISO area from the rest, right? It's equivalent to that. And that means we are restricting how much supply can come from outside into the ISO area. That is going to tend to naturally increase prices in the ISO area and relative to the remaining prices in the rest of the EIM market. Potentially, if it reaches the level that are required to create price separation, you are going to see that price separation will result in higher prices in the ISO area. And we did see those, and I'm sure participants also saw those implications. So we may continue to assess the implications of having this in place. I think, as I indicated earlier, the drivers for this were more ensuring that we give the market an opportunity to account for the supply that realistically could be available when the balancing time comes in the 5-minute market. This is not the end of the discussion. I think once we agree internally how we're going to approach this, there will be some socialization and stakeholder involvement to reach potential solutions or changes to the processes we have.
Yeah, that all sounds good. And of course, things sometimes have to be done in the heat of the moment in operations to maintain reliability. And of course, we all want to see that happen. But the opportunity now over the next 5-ish months, hopefully, of fingers crossed, nice, smooth, calm operations gives us an opportunity to figure out maybe better ways of dealing with these issues before we get into summer operations again. Some of these are things that we talked about in the resource efficiency evaluation enhancements when we were looking at some of the impacts of HASP advisory transfers and looking at the interplay between, HASP load bias and how that's generally put in at a higher level in HASP and FMM and then pulled out in RTD. And, I think all those things are worth kind of teasing apart now that we have a kind of case to look at what happens if you change those, the basis for the advisory transfers, how that impacts overall the market. And, there are, I'm not sure if the HASP make-whole payments for hourly block imports was in place during this time, but, there are a number of sort of special circumstance things that could have been going on during this. That'd be great to drill into all of it. The last just kind of point of kind of information I was hoping to grab was, were these limitations placed on the north-south facilities as well, or those were, I'm assuming those were kind of net importers to CAISO during HASP, and so those did not have limitations? It was only sort of the interfaces that were expected to be net exporters that had the limitations put on them?
Oh, no, this is a limitation that was put effectively in every single transfer with the CAISO, but only in the import direction.
And did that, just noting that some of the north to south EIN transfers are only able to be adjusted on a 15-minute basis, if I'm remembering correctly, was that taken into considerations? Wouldn't that have blocked meaningful amount of transfers?
Yeah, I know exactly what you are meaning. I think it's a matter of naming here. The limitations that we imposed in the real-time market, let me try to be as surgical as possible on this. We imposed limitations in both the HASP and the 15-minute market. The limitations were not imposed in the RTD 5-minute market. The limitations were imposed in the import direction only, transfers imports coming into the CAISO balancing area. And the limitations were imposed on what we call dynamic transfers. These are transfers that can be optimized in the pre-dispatch market, HASP, FMM, but also in the RTD market. They are basically optimized in the RTD, and therefore they can change. And these are the ones that drove these changes. In addition to that, we have other transfers that are called static. These are the ones that can only be optimized in the 15-minute market. Because they do not change from the 15-minute market to the 5-minute market, they didn't impose this uncertainty in the advisory transfers. Therefore, they were not limited. They were able to flow and be optimized in the pre-dispatch HASP 15-minute market, and there is nothing to optimize in the 5-minute market. So they were not limited. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's good extra information. Might be interesting just to kind of look at the total volume and some pricing associated with those that came in. But I've taken up a lot of time here. I appreciate the deeper dive, and whether it's in I think we have an initiative coming up in the spring that might be looking at like extended FRP, some other resource efficiency related changes. Just look forward to diving into this again in the future. And thanks again for the time and drilling down further.
Yeah, thank you, Dan, for the comments. Very good points taken. Okay, Michelle, do we have any other comments, questions?
No questions at this time.
No questions.
Okay. This is the first topic. Let's move on to the second topic. We're going to switch gears here to discuss now an area of completely different expertise. This is regarding the storage enhancements that we implemented in two parts, one in July 1st, 2023, and the second part in November 1st. I will pass it to Quinn Zhao to provide that update.
Thank you, Guillermo. And this is Quinn from Market Analysis. The latest energy storage enhancements changes went live in November. One of the focuses in ESE was to incorporate regulation into the state of charge management for storage resources to enhance the efficiency and reliability for our storage participation. To quickly remind ourselves the related changes in ESE, Track 1 was activated on July 1st. According to the policy proposal, energy range of storage resource needs to support at least 50% of its AES awards in the opposite direction. And we introduced associated optimization model changes and new set of bidding rules in real time. And Track 2 was activated on November 1st this year. That was last month. We introduced a new set of constraints with the attenuation factors. And in this section, we provide a review focusing on regulation performances after the ESE activation. Next slide, please. Here is a high-level overview what the change with the attenuation factor is about. The first bullet here presents the original state of charge equations, the state of charge with energy impacts only. And from November 1st, a new set of constraints is introduced as shown in the second bullet. We call it SOC-AT, that's SOC with attenuation factors. By implementing this SOC with attenuation factors, we eliminate the direct coupling of energy and AS from the previous proposal while still manage the feasibility of regulation awards. Here, the variables highlighted in red, ATRU and ATRD, are the multipliers defining the expected proportion of regulation awards that are utilized in real time. In other words, the anticipated impact of regulation on the real-time state of charge. Next slide, please. Okay, the next set of slides will delve into the overall performance metrics for regulation in storage resources. We start by looking at the proportion of storage resources in regulation requirements within the day-ahead market, or ISM market, from June to November this year. The y-axis marks the percentages, and each vertical box plot displays the monthly distribution. The percentage share here is defined as the total market awards from hourly SR resource type divided by the total market requirement from that commodity. So as you can see here, the storage resources consistently hold a substantial share in the regulation requirement. The medians of reg up share are close to 100%, and the medians of reg down share have consistently exceeded 50%. And there are no substantial changes in the reg up side with ESE implementation, and we observed a decline in reg down percentage share since July that aligns with ESE Track 1 enhancement, and no really significant changes with Track 2 implementation in November. Next slide, please. This chart utilizes the same data set, presenting the hourly breakdown of the storage resources share in reg up across the months. Again, the percentage share has been consistently close to 100% over the 6-month period, and you can see the high percentage shares in the afternoon peak hours in July and August in the summer, and high percentage shares in the early hours of the day after September. There's no material change observed in the trends with ESE implementation. Next slide, please. Again, the same data set. This is the hourly breakdown of storage resource share in the reg down side. We see the noticeable decline across all hours since July. That's the chart in yellow. And in some cases with mediums close to zero during the afternoon peak hours. And there's no significant change following the November implementation. Next slide, please. Here we look at the AS awards by resource composition. So each bar is the average monthly IFM AS awards, and stacked by resource types. We have gas in pink, water in blue, other types in purple, and then storage resources marked in green. And storage resources have been consistently providing reg up and down and a smaller amount of spin and non-spin. We see the drop in reg down averages in green in July implementation there too. Next slide, please. Pulling out storage resources alone, this is the monthly distribution of the same data, IFM AS awards in box plot. So no material changes with November implementation. And next slide, please. Again, hourly distribution of IFM reg upwards by month. You see the highest megawatts in the afternoon peak hours. Next one. I'm glancing through these slides because they have similar content. And this one is the hourly distribution of IFM reg downwards by month. And the highest megawatts are usually in the midday hours when there's also plenty of solar production. Next slide, please. Okay. So as a sanity check, this is a scatter plot showing the IFM regulation prices at the resource level in November. So that's all the resources receiving reg up or reg down awards from last month. And we haven't seen negative regulation prices in IFM following the Track 2 implementation. Next slide, please. Similarly, we also looked at RTPD regulation prices at the resource level in November. Again, all the resources receiving a reg up or down awards last month. This is to confirm that all regulation prices are non-negative with Track 2 implementation. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide presents the IFM regulation bidding capacity from storage resources over the 6-month period. These are hourly bars, so it's kind of hard to see the details, but you kind of see the trend. There are no significant changes in the regulation bidding behavior. And there's color-coded pricing bucket down there. I think the more important part is the overall trend of the shape. You may notice a gradual increase in bidding capacity that is due to the new resource entry. And other than that, we don't see any significant changes with the ESE implementation. Next slide, please. Okay, same thing. This is the regulation bidding capacity in RTPD in FMM market. Same story here. We don't see a significant change in bidding behavior. Next slide, please. Okay, let me pause here before I switch topic. Is there any questions? I think I see one hand.
Yes, we have Callie's hand. Yep, I'll go ahead and unmute Callie.
Hi, this is Callie Wells with WPTF. First of all, thank you so much for putting all these metrics together. It's really useful. I actually have a couple questions. So my first one is back on slide 83. I'm not sure if you can go back about 11 slides. Yes, perfect. Thank you. So just quick question on your reg up chart on the left. Is that axes in percentages? Because I'm not quite sure why we would have storage providing more than 100% share of the requirement.
Yes, these are in percentages, and in the upside, the AS up, there is a cascading logic. So the reg up awards actually can cascade down to spin and non-spin. That's why we have over 100% there.
Okay, so this includes the cascade. So they are providing reg up, but it's helping to meet the spin and non-spin requirement, which is why we're getting more than 100%. Okay, thank you. That makes sense. And then my second question is, so I know the first set of changes, track 1, went into effect in July. And I do see, like, on the reg down chart, there does seem to be a shift in the share of reg down that storage resources are providing from June to July. Did you guys run the metrics maybe a few months prior to June? I'm not sure if that's just a data anomaly or if there was actually a shift and we're just not seeing that full shift because the data just starts at June.
We didn't include, we didn't look at the month before June, but we can take a look at that data later in the future sessions.
Okay, yeah, that would be super helpful because I can't tell if that's just a blip in the data or if there was maybe the track 1 changes that actually have an impact. And, you know, if we look at April and May, we'll see levels similar to June and then it drops down in July. So yeah, that would be great if you could look at that. And then my second set of questions is actually, sorry, if you can advance back to slide 92 or 93, either one is fine. So I know one of the sets of changes that went into effect in July was a restriction on how much storage resources can bid in to provide regulation. So I'm surprised we're not seeing a drop in the capacity that they can bid in. And maybe that's more specific to the slide 93 when it was showing real time. So is this data the amount that was bid in before that constraint was applied and maybe reduced their bidding capacity? Because I would have thought, given that change, that we would have seen a drop in capacity bid in.
Right, that is something we can go back and check further. This is the bidding capacity that is submitted from the resources, and we do have the optimization model change also in there to limit. And you're right, we had new bidding rules, so we can go back and check the data why there's no drop in the trend.
Yeah, that would be great. And it could be that we just had maybe the equivalent amount of additional resources come online in July. But yeah, I was expecting to see a drop. So if we could figure out if maybe these are the bidding capacity before that, the market applied that constraint, that would be extremely useful.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Any other questions before we move forward?
No questions at this time.
Okay, let me just switch topic. So I'm moving on to the attenuation factor topic. This is the overview of this change. So attenuation factors are separately calculated for each hour and each direction. So, and they're applied in both day ahead and real-time markets. And these values are derived through the estimation of actual regulatory usage using historical data. So for example, the attenuation factors currently we're using for Q4 2023 are determined based on the data from Q4 2022. And considering seasonality, our current plan involves a quarterly review and update of these attenuation factors. And so when a resource is providing either regulation up or down, it will respond to a 4-second AGC signal. We use the delta between AGC set point and the dispatch operating point, DOP, as the utilized megawatt. And then we compare the usage to the regulation of words to get the proportion. So that's the percentage. And these values are calculated as a weighted average on the system level to smooth out any outliers in the system. And yeah, that's the equation down there. Next slide, please. This is the attenuation factors for Q4 2023 derived from Q4 2022 data. We call it utilized percentages because it's actually the actual utilization. And the utilized percentage of RU that's in blue remains low, mostly below 10% for hours, except for 2. And then the utilized percentage of RD in pink mostly fall into the 20% to 40% range. Next slide, please. So one step into the more details, this is the hourly distribution of each utilization. So RU utilization are generally lower, as we told before. You can see the small distributions at the bottom. And then RD had higher utilizations, especially in the peak hours. That's in pink. Next slide, please. This is the same data in a more granular view. On the top row there, the pink boxes are RD utilizations, and the bottom row, the blue boxes are RU utilizations. And each vertical column has a month label on top. That is 24 hourly view in the corresponding months. So you can see the higher medians and wider spreads in RD utilization, especially in hour ending 18, 19. That's where we had the high numbers in there. Next slide, please. Okay, so the plan is to progressively introduce the attenuation factors over the initial months. So we begin at 25% in November and gradually increase by 25% increments to achieve 100% over a span of 4 months. Here we're showing the actual utilization in November. That's the blue bars there, comparing that with the calculated attenuation factors for this quarter. So the black dashed line is the full values attenuation factors, and the yellow line down there is the 25% that was in the November actual implementation. You can see that the 25% values are low comparing to the actual usage, especially in the midday hours. Because of this, we really expected minimum impact at this level. Next slide, please. It's the same plot on the red down side. Again, the full value attenuation factors in black, they're pretty comparable to the actual usage in November. That's the blue bars there. And the 25%, that's the yellow line down there, or even the 50% line, that's the green line in the middle, were well below the actual utilization. Next slide, please. Okay, so these attenuation factors are posted on the CAISO website 1 month prior to the quarter. So the 2024 Q1 values are actually posted already. They were posted on November 30th. So these values are computed using 2023 Q1 data. We just want to compare the 2024 Q1 versus 2023 Q4 numbers. And here's for reg ops side. You see that the 2024 Q1 RU factors are generally lower than the 2023 Q4 values for most of the hours. Next slide, please. Yeah, we also compare the reg down side. The reg down numbers, 2024 Q1 versus 2023 Q4. And yeah, the 2024 Q1 are the blue bars, and the pink bars are 2023 Q4 numbers. So the new values are higher for the afternoon peak hours or peak to the evening hours, and the rest are pretty comparable. Next slide, please. Okay, let me pause here again. Any questions about attenuation factor calculations before I switch topic again?
I don't see any questions. Let me see. I think we only got a compliment for you from C.D. McLean on CEC, California Energy Commission. Says great work for the team for advancing the cause around ancillary services utilization, hoping that this continues to be applied and broadly so. That's all. Gwen.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let me just start. Can we go back one slide? Yes. Let me switch topic again. We look at a few other metrics to look at the performance in general, right? So the objective is to procure all the regulation requirements through the day-ahead market, and FMM may procure additional regulation on top of day-ahead awards. And this slide shows the hourly delta reg up awards, that's RTPD minus IFM awards from storage resources in box plot. So a negative value means the market procured less reg up in RTPD from storage resources. And these deltas can be due to various reasons. For example, there's feasibility reason, resource outages, or even economics. So the one extreme point down there, the minus 300 something point, was actually from a resource outage. So this is the delta on the RU side. Next slide, please. Same thing, this is hourly delta on RD awards from storage resources. If the system doesn't procure regulation from storage resources, then the requirement will be fulfilled by other resource types in the real time too. So this provides the delta awards in the reg down side. Next slide, please. Okay. The next 3 slides will show something we call the resource deviation. This one shows the storage resource deviation in November when RU rect up was dispatched. Resource deviation here is defined as the difference between AGC set point and the actual megawatt. That is the actual from PyTech when regulation up was dispatched. So to get the deviation data, we take the resource level 1 minute sample because it's a little more forgiving from the Pi data, and applied 0.1 megawatt or 1% tolerance to filter out the resources that are deviating from the instruction. And here's the distribution per hour on the aggregated level. Ideally, we expect small to non-deviation because storage resources usually are able to follow very closely. And so you can see that most deviations are small, around zeros. You see some large numbers of deviations in real time in November on the reg up side. Next slide, please. So same thing on the reg down side. This is the resource deviation again in November when RD was dispatched. So some large values show up in both directions, and it's not really hourly specific. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the last one. Here's a scatter plot when we're doing resource deviation in vertical axis versus the deviation megawatt in vertical axis versus the percentage SOC as the horizontal axis. And this is the resource 1 minute sample data in all November, so it's a lot of data point in there. The highest and the lowest 20% of the SOC ranges are shaded in gray, highlighted in gray, and it's kind of hard to see the details, but the most extreme deviations, if you see closely, the most extreme deviations, the extreme points, all showed up when the resource SOC were close to the upper or lower boundaries. Next slide, please. Okay, from this one, I think the next 4 slides are the normal deck in the storage storage performance for MPPF. There is no material changes in the overall energy and the SOC trends, and you can. I'm not going to go through the details in this slide, but you can see the overall shape. And I think my section is done. Can we go forward 3 more slides? Next one. And next one. Yes, this is the last one of the storage section. Any questions on the storage topic? Hearing none. Okay.
We do have a question in queue.
Sorry, go ahead.
Mike, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. Would the ISO consider publishing the regulation dispatch data on an hourly basis in aggregate? So we received the individual 5-minute dispatch data by resource that we control, but just looking for the data on an aggregate basis by hour.
On the resource level?
No, in aggregate. So all resources, so we can see the
Okay.
dispatch in total.
We do have, let me see, we do have that data in the storage report. We have a daily storage performance report posted on website, and you can get that data from there, the regulation total from storage resources, if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, I didn't know that was available, so I'll take a look. Is there, if it is the data that I'm looking for, would it be possible to get that at some point in the near future, transition to more of an OASIS type report so we can set up automated downloads?
Yeah, we can talk about that for the future implementation, for sure.
Okay, and then quickly, in the settlement user group, also in the release user group, I think they touched on it. There's discussion of correcting the ASSOC logic that was implemented in July, and I was just wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about that and the timing and historical resettlement window, if you guys are actually doing retroactive settlements.
I don't have that information with me today, but we can provide the update or information you request later or offline.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Any other questions?
There are no additional questions.
Sounds good. I'll hand it over to Jessica, I believe, for the next section.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jessica Stewart, and I am a senior energy meteorologist on the short-term forecasting team. And I'll be going over some of the impacts that we saw from the renewable side and load side from the eclipse. Next slide, please. So just a quick overview of the eclipse. We had an annular eclipse pass through most of the western United States on Saturday, October 14th. We saw impacts across the EIM footprint in California from about 8 to 11 a.m., with the largest impact peaking around 9:30 when the sun was obscured by about 95% at maximum across the path of annularity, highlighted in the yellow and orange on the map on the top right. We did have cloud cover across the Pacific Northwest and parts of Northern California during the eclipse, which is shown in the satellite imagery in the bottom right-hand corner, which did help to lessen the impact for some of those regions and I'll go over that in the next couple of slides. As I mentioned, we had impacts to CAISO grid-scale solar as well as load, but also to our EIM grid-scale solar, our behind-the-meter solar, and then our net load impact as a result as well. Next slide, please. So starting with the CAISO grid-scale solar, on this plot, the orange here is our preliminary 5-minute eclipse forecast that we published in our technical bulletin that came out in September. The yellow here are the actuals from October 19th, which was a sunny October day about a week after the eclipse, to just show you the normal clear sky October solar generation. The green here is the solar actuals from the eclipse that were observed, and then the blue line are the solar actuals with the curtailments added back in. And we show that because the forecasts that we produce are always full fuel, meaning they don't include curtailment impacts in the forecast. So we wanted to show the comparison of the actuals of the curtailments back in compared to the forecast for that day in the preliminary analysis. So we did say the impacts from about 8:10 through the maximum impact at 9:30. We saw an average ramp down of about minus 40 megawatts per minute during that period, compared to an average ramp of about 109 megawatts on a clear sky day. So about overall almost a 150 megawatt difference in the ramp and the direction on that day. We saw our maximum impact around 9:30 in the morning, where our solar minimum hit a minimum of 3,230 megawatts, which is over 9,600 megawatt difference compared to that clear sky October day on October 19th. Then the period from 9:30 to 10:20, we had an average ramp up of about 131 megawatts per minute. And then if you compare it to the entire eclipse period from 9:30 to about 11 a.m., we had an average of about 71 megawatts per minute. Noting that after about that 10:20 time frame, curtailments were present across the system, which really limited the ramping of the solar output through that period of about 10:20 to the end of the eclipse at 11 a.m. Next slide, please. So shifting over to the load impacts, the top left graph here is the CAISO eclipse simulation, which is shown in the dashed line, compared to some of our various further out model horizons and forecasts, such as the day ahead and the T120 forecast. And then the graphs in the top right, those 4 smaller plots, are for our 4 EIM regional aggregates, the non-CAISO California entities, Pacific Northwest, the Central, and then the Desert Southwest. And then the bottom graphs here are more real-time horizons. So our HASP, RTD, RTPD, and actuals. And then same thing, the bottom left plot is for CAISO, and then the bottom 4 smaller graphs are for our 4 EIM regions. So within the CAISO footprint, we have about 14,300 megawatts of behind-the-meter solar capacity. So on the eclipse day, we did see that pretty large partial obscuration of the sun, which reduced our rooftop solar output, and then ended up increasing the load by about 2,064 megawatts from that period of about 8:30 a.m. to 9:20 a.m. And then afterwards, as the obscuration of the sun subsided, the output of the rooftop solar returned to normal levels, and then our load decreased by about 5,738 megawatts from 9:20 a.m. to 11 a.m. Taking a look at the WEIMs, the non-CAISO California EIM region showed a load increase of about 357 megawatts, or about a 9% increase as the eclipse began. The impact for the Pacific Northwest on the eclipse day was pretty minimal for a couple of reasons. One is because we had cloud cover across that area, as I mentioned. They also have the lowest behind-the-meter capacity of the WEIM regions. So despite having the, largest obscuration pass through that region, both of those things kind of led to an overall minimal impact for the Pacific Northwest EIM entities. The Desert Southwest region showed the strongest eclipse impacts, with the morning load increasing by about 1,172 megawatts, about a 13% increase relative to the eclipse start load. And then the Central EIM region showed a load increase of a little under 600 megawatts, or about a 5% increase relative to the eclipse start. Next slide, please. So taking a look at the CAISO net load ramp, on this plot, the net load is shown in blue. The wind at the very bottom is the dotted line, and then the solar here is the green dashed line. So from about 8:15 to 9:15 a.m., we had a net load increase of about 5,975 megawatts. During that ramp-up period, the net load increased by approximately 100 megawatts per minute on average, with a max ramp of 190 megawatts per minute. As the eclipse began to wane, net load dropped by about 12,355 megawatts from 9:15 a.m. to 11 a.m. So a pretty large drop over that hour and 45-minute time frame. And during that ramp down period, the net load decreased by approximately 118 megawatts a minute on average, with a maximum ramp of about 267 megawatts per minute. So a very large ramp down as the eclipse waned. So across the system, we generally saw the larger impacts on the eclipse return, or the period from when the maximum eclipse happened through the end of the eclipse. Really quickly, with regards to our lessons learned on the load side, we did see some room for model improvement, especially during the period from when the sun was fully obscured to the end of the eclipse, as I mentioned. We did run some analysis after the eclipse, and that showed that it was critical to run on either the reconstituted or direct model in real time to handle the behind-the-meter impact. We noted that our reconstituted model did perform better in some regions during that day, which is something we will keep in mind for our next eclipse, which is coming shortly in April 2024. Although the West won't be as directly impacted from this one, it's something that we'll still be impacted by and keep an eye on and keep that information in mind when heading into the next eclipse. So with that, I will pause and see if there are any questions on the renewable or load piece before I pass it over for the market impacts.
There are currently no questions in queue.
Okay, awesome. Abhishek, I will pass it over to your way to go over the market impacts.
Thanks, Jessica. This is Abhishek Kundiwale from Market Analysis. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Can you go to the next slide? Yes, I'll go over the market performance during the October 14 solar eclipse event. Before the solar eclipse event, there was significant coordination with other entities in the West, and ISO prepared for months before the event. ISO did take proactive measures to manage the conditions, such as additional procurement of regulation. Regulation requirements were adjusted to better position the system to absorb the rapid changes in the generation mix. Regulation up was increased to about 2,000 megawatts, and regulation down was increased to about 1,850 megawatts during the eclipse event. Additionally, there were exceptional dispatches as seen in the chart below here that was used to charge the state of charge for storage resources. Another measure was to procure in the day-ahead market through the RUC adjustments. Can you go to the next slide, please? This chart provides the ISO's resource breakdown for October 14th, include the rapid changes in solar production during the eclipse hours from hours 8 to 11. During the early hours of the eclipse at about 8:30 a.m., solar production, which is shown in yellow, began to decrease, and at the same time, gas production, which is shown in orange in this chart, and hydro production, which is shown in blue color, they compensated for the loss of solar production. Imports, obviously, imports did play a role. Imports, which is shown in the green color in this chart, did see an increase as well during that time. After about 9:30 a.m., when solar was ramping up, the gas generation, hydro generation, and the imports were dispatched down to compensate with the rapid increase in solar production. Batteries, which is shown in purple, they were charging when solar generation was ramping up. Batteries were charging in the early hours of the day before the solar eclipse, so they were ready to be discharged during. So they are ready to be discharged during the eclipse. The black solid line in this chart is the load shape profile for October 14. Can you go to the next slide? This chart provides the profile of actual solar production shown in blue color and the actual load profile, which is compared to the profile of renewable curtailments. During intervals in hour ending 11, when solar generation was ramping up back to full production, load was reaching a low point and the market was reducing other types of supply. This led to oversupply condition in the market, which led to renewable curtailments of up to 5,500 megawatts in hour ending 11. This chart shows the overlay of solar production along with renewable curtailments. Next slide, please. Prices. This slide shows a comparison of ISO prices among IFM, FMM, and RTD markets for the 3 days surrounding the eclipse. The comparison of these 3 days allows us to see if there is a significant change in pattern during the eclipse. During the event that is shown in the highlighted portion on October 14, prices separated more between the markets and they were much lower as compared to the other days. On October 14, especially during the event when solar production was about to ramp up, the increase in supply and low loads resulted in an oversupply condition with negative prices. By hour ending 12 to 13, the solar production was already ramped up to its full production and prices were following the normal trend from that point onwards. Can you go to the next slide, please? Intertie transactions. The intertie transactions are an important aspect of the ISO system. The net schedule interchange that we call it as an NSI are the net imports or exports depending on the direction in or out of ISO BAE. This chart shows the NSI in the RTD market for the 3-day period surrounding the eclipse event. October 13, which is shown in red color, shows a more typical day where NSI is at its high during the early morning hours, that is importing energy into the ISO BAE, and then slowly decreasing during the middle hours of the day, that is increasing the exports during the high solar production in the middle hours. On the day of the eclipse, the pattern that is shown in green, the pattern changed a bit, where ISO imported more during the solar reduction hours to compensate for the loss of solar, and then suddenly drops down as soon as the solar production was ramping up. In this chart, the highlighted portion should be from hour ending 9 onwards. Because this is hour ending 9, it should be from hour ending 9. We can go ahead and fix it later on after this call. Can we go to the next slide? Battery resources played a role during the solar eclipse event. There were about 83 storage resources actively participating in the ISO market on October 14. Most of them participated in both energy and ancillary market. Typically, storage resources would charge during the peak solar hours, that is middle of the day, and then discharge in the evening load peak hours, that is the net load hours. However, on October 14, as you can see in this chart, and I talked about that in previous slides, storage resources were charging during the morning hours, that is in advance to prepare for the event, and then discharge during the eclipse hours, and subsequently charge again for the later evening peak load hours. So this chart shows the profile of the RTD energy awards for storage resources compared to the prices for the 3-day period, that is 14 to 15. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, thank you. This chart shows the transfer for ISO in the RTD market. The negative values indicate that it was importing energy into the ISO, and the positive values indicate that there were transfers out of ISO BA. The chart shows the comparison of transfers into ISO-BA across the 3-day period to see any patterns or anomalies observed during the solar eclipse hours. In this case, during the hour ending 9, there was a steep increase in exports, that is the transfers out of ISO-BA just before the solar eclipse. As soon as the solar production started to decrease during the eclipse, there was a decrease in exports, that is the transfers out of ISO-BA, and subsequently the transfers started to increase out of ISO-BA to comply with the market conditions. Can you go to the next slide, please? And this is the last slide. This is the regulation cost. The chart here shows that the cost to procure regulation up and down in both day-ahead market and the real-time market for the period starting from September 1st to October 31st to show a comparison across days. And you can see that the cost for October, the regulation cost for October 14 was higher as compared to the other neighboring days. So that's it from the eclipse, the market performance. Any questions?
There are no questions in queue.
Okay, thank you. And I'll pass it on to Guillermo.
Thank you, Abhishek. Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay, one more. We're going to switch gears now in topics. This is an area that we have been discussing for some time through the MPPF forums, and it's of critical interest that we have discussed with participants and how the ISO may take actions to adapt the market to the actual conditions or the conditions that the operators may expect to see when operating the grid. And one of these actions is what we call the load conformance. The load conformance is no more than adjusting the load forecast up or down across any of the markets. We don't apply that to the integrated forward market, that is the financial market, but we apply that to the reliability unit commitment, the ROC process, or any of the sub-real-time markets such as the hourly ahead process, HASP, the 15-minute market, FMN, and the 5-minute market, RTD. And effectively what this load conformance is going to do is to dispatch supply accordingly to either meet the additional requirement if the adjustment is in the upward direction, or to reduce the supply if the adjustment is in the downward direction. It effectively asks for more or less supply to be met in addition to the load forecast. We have, in different forums, in different policy discussions, discussed specifically the implications of having the use of the load conformance in any of the markets. The load conformance has been, to a great extent, one of the last resorts that the system operators may have to true up the market to the system conditions they are expecting to have or they are dealing with, depending on the time frame. When we were analyzing the summer 2022 performance, we have this discussion, and actually the September report of 2022 has these metrics that we are showing in this presentation, where the ROC adjustment of load conformance in the ROC process amounted up to 10,000 megawatts, 9,000 megawatts in the critical days of the September heat wave. And that raised naturally some concerns, because that is, relatively speaking, quite a high number if you put that in terms of the level of demand that we have in the system. What we came out of this assessment that we did in the September timeframe was that 10,000 megawatts of load conformance, the maximum value observed so far, may have been excessive relative to the conditions that we wanted to account for. And it was rooted in the way how these adjustments were estimated. The ROC adjustments have a lot of history. This is not the first time we have been doing this. Didn't start in the summer 2022. But as you may recall, if you have been participating in this type of discussions, this has a long trajectory that started with some individual ad hoc adjustments implemented by the operators, given the lack of systems, protocols, or more scientifically estimated values. Over the years, we have tried to tune to improve the guiding principles of how to estimate these ROC adjustments. And at some point, it was purely based on operational judgment, based on the conditions that they projected to see. We moved towards relying on what we call the confidence bands, trying to take some historical information of how much the load, the wind, the solar move from the day ahead to the real time, and start incorporating these others. The 10,000 megawatts that we saw in September were the compounded effect of just summing up these three others. That was not the most efficient way to utilize these others. Based on the outcome of 2022, the ISO committed to further assess the need to come with a better, more sophisticated, more programmatic approach to estimate the guiding principles for the ROC adjustments. And what we indicated is that we would be using basically the same logic that we have projected to start using the implementation of the day-ahead market enhancements, the DIM logic. And in addition to that, this was actually part of a more holistic effort implemented or started by the ISO. And that overall effort was to really go after the causes, the drivers for which we actually needed to have load conformance in place. This is the process, the effort that we started with 2023. If we can move to the next slide, please. Therefore, once we completed the assessment of the summer 2022, there were two main items that we committed to do. The first one is to enhance the logic, enhance the calculation, try to minimize subjectivity, given the fact that we can derive that more numerically speaking, more precisely. And that reduced to use the proposed imbalance reserve logic. That is no more than estimating the uncertainty related to weather conditions captured by the movement of load, wind, and solar. That is all together capturing what we call the net load uncertainty. And the second piece was to continue or to more formally assess the need to conform the load in the real-time markets. Effectively, in July 2023, we start using this imbalance reserve type of calculation for the ROC guiding. And prior to that, in the first half of the year, CAISO started to run what we called a pilot program to first identify the causes, try to isolate conditions, run a small pilot for a few days, trying to minimize the utilization of load conformance, get the feedback, what we see, what we gain, how the system performs with no load conformance. And based on that, trying to expand on understanding the dynamics of the lack of using load conformance. And this is, I would say, a work in progress. This is the continuous evolution to be in a better place, have a more well-defined logic, calculation-based, to guide the need for utilization of the load conformance. The rest of this topic consists of two parts. The first one is an assessment of how that estimation of ROC adjustments utilizing the imbalance reserve has played, at least for the first 2 months or 3 months of the implementation of this logic. And the second part is to see the consequences that we have seen in the market, specific to the ROC adjustments, and also the follow-up of what we have been doing for the pilot program in the real-time market. We will continue to work on that, and we will continue to report on the progress that we are doing. I would say the overarching principle here is that we are evolving towards an approach that is data-driven, take away subjectivity and not create these complications for the operators. And once we have all that information, it's a matter of finding the right configuration, the right setup to ensure that we are capturing the uncertainty that we need to hedge and making it efficient in terms of the implications that this may have for the market. I will pass it to Amber, and then I will come back for the second part of the presentation.
Oh, perfect. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead.
All right, we can move to the next slide. All right, so overall, like Guillermo talked about, we've been analyzing uncertainty forecasting in multiple different horizons. The RUC time frame and the RUC uncertainty is one of the time frames that we really have been analyzing. What is the best way to come up with a forecast of the amount of uncertainty that we're going to have on the net load? And notice that all these techniques right now that we're focused on are really focused on the variables of load, which has the behind-the-meter solar penetration in it, wind, and solar, right? So we're looking at that as a net load perspective and really trying to figure out the best way to quantify the uncertainty that's there and the overall coverage that uncertainty is going to give us. So one of the things that we did when we were in 2022 is we wanted to review the actual performance of the RUC guiding from the summer 2022 timeframe. And we're going to talk a little bit in reverse. Some of this deck was in the September NPPF report, but we didn't have time to get to it. So we wanted to look at what we did in summer of 2022, how that ended up looking, and then we're going to walk through some potential changes as we are now in the winter season as well. So with that, we introduced on July 1st a RUC recommendation that simulates the overall performance similar to the Mosaic approach in the flexible ramp product. With that, we will look at what we saw in the 2022 summer to guide the methodology and the results of what we will choose to do in 2023 and then review the results of 2023. Next slide. So very similarly to the slide that you saw on the earlier graph is when you look at 2022's summer, one of the things that we were doing is we were estimating the confidence bands or the uncertainty by each individual type. One of the things that this ended up doing is it resulted in extra requirement at the peak time period, but it also resulted in poor coverage during the off-peak time periods. And you can really see this as depicted in the two graphs. On the left side, this is the RUC requirement that was utilized during the different time periods for the different types of the reasons that were shaded in the different colors. And then on the right side, this was the realized uncertainty that was seen during those days. It is always hard to look at each individual approach and play the Monday morning quarterback. And as you guys know, for September 8th that's on this graph, it's the bottom right one where you had the highest level of the RUC requirement. That also was a day that we had remnants of a hurricane system coming in to Southern California at the same time we were in an extreme heat event. So there was a lot of uncertainty in the weather forecast, but what you saw is that the load during that event ended up dropping. You had a lot of solar error, which was expected because of the hurricane remnants, but ultimately you did not need the 9,000 megawatts of RUC requirement during that time. You really saw the maximums be around that 4,500 megawatt time period. So with that, we can go to the next slide. We wanted to really start honing in on a good way to be able to estimate what the net load uncertainty requirements are, knowing that sometimes the load can go in the opposite direction and you don't really need a summed approach to the overall uncertainty there. Very similar to the imbalance requirement design that will go into place with the DAME initiatives. Next slide. One of the things that we're focusing on is how we assess the performance of a probabilistic uncertainty forecast. The items that we've been using to assess the performance of a probabilistic forecast is really focused in 4 areas. One area is coverage. So if our goal is to take an insurance policy out at the 95th percentile, that means that we need to achieve 97.5% on the top and 2.5% on the bottom. The second is to really watch the overall average requirements in the megawatts over time periods as well as specific time periods like peak or net load peak. The other 2 items are things that we have been evaluating, but we also see this is an area of exploration where we may be changing those metrics in future MPPF meetings to define how close the overall requirement is from that observed uncertainty that you see, and then also looking at the exceeding part. So when you look at the observed uncertainty, how often is it exceeding the estimated requirement and by how much? Ultimately, when you're looking at the performance of a probabilistic forecast, you really want to look at it from a calibration perspective, which is really where that coverage comes in for the model, because if you want your model to target 95%, that's really what you want to see. How it does with the requirement, but then also you want to look at it in a bucket of what you could call informativeness, right? Closeness could be a component of informativeness, exceeding could be a component of informativeness, but, you know, is the requirements that you're getting helping you on the higher uncertainty days and not giving you as much on those lower uncertainty days? Next slide. So as we were preparing for the summer of 2023, we wanted to run a simulation of the performance of the last 500 days, really looking at certain groups of days, and you'll see those in the next slide. One of them really focused on the heat wave days, summer time periods, all seasons, as well as the shoulder seasons, December, January, February. And then we wanted to trial different methodologies. We wanted to trial a similar to the Dame-approved design of Mosaic. We wanted to trial the 97.5% net load histogram. That's what the FRP ran off of before the enhanced designs came in on 2/1 of 2023. And then also the 99th percentile of the net load histogram, really to get a feel of what is the best approach for us to take as we head into this summer where we want to enhance our forecasting capability of that net load uncertainty in the rough time frame. With that, we can go to the next slide. So this is a graph. There's a lot of data on this graph, so I'm going to walk through a few pieces of it. So each one of the boxes is a different time period that we're analyzing. The boxes at the top left are the 2022 heat wave long. So this is that long heat wave. So it's a 10-day heat wave at the end of August and into the beginning of September. So it was the whole data set. The one right next to it is the heat wave short. So the highest load days during that period of time. The one on the top right is all the days in the time period. And then at the bottom, you see December, January, February, March. In the middle, you see high load. And then on the right, you see summer. So we're really trying to analyze the different requirements that exist over time. So with that, one of the things that we saw as we were analyzing 2022 data in preparation for 2023 is that the coverage of the Mosaic approach is in red. So when you look at the different methods that we were trialing, red is Mosaic, the different lines are different combinations of parameters, whether it be the days that we're using in the sample set or the forward-backward look of the different periods. The green is the 97.5 histogram, and the blue is the 99th percent histogram. And then on the far left side, our goal is to get to the 97.5%, which is the target, because our target is the 95th percentile for all of our uncertainty products at this time. We're really targeting the coverage of the 95th percentile. So that would be, when we're looking at this slide, the 97.5 time period. So with that, you can see that we're concerned based on this analysis of the coverage that happened during the extreme heat event of 2022 for the MOSAIC approach. There's two things to take into consideration here. One, the MOSAIC approach in 2022 does not have 2022's data, right? So we don't have the 10-day long historic heat wave in our training set. That's one thing to keep into consideration, but it also showed that when we were at that extreme weather, the MOSAIC methodology was performing at a coverage level below 60%. So with this information, we can go to the next slide. That we saw that on the most extreme day, we had a large departure in the cover between the MOSAIC and the histogram. But when you looked at the broader time periods, right, that top right graph, the all graph, you did see that the MOSAIC had comparable coverage with and lower average requirement than the net load histogram approaches that were there. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. Ultimately, those were good results to see, right? We saw that we had a lower requirement. You saw that it was covering the overall picture of the all days. So on July 1st of 2023, the CAISO started utilizing an imbalance reserve-like methodology to inform the RUC adjustments for the net load uncertainty. And the goal of this was really to look to improve the performance on the previous RUC forecasting recommendations, where you definitely saw that summing them did not work out in whole. It really just provided poor coverage overnight and too much coverage during those peak hours. We wanted to leverage the MOSAIC methodology from the existing FRP design, and then we wanted to be able to adapt the recommendation when approaching weather extremes. So as we ran through the summer of 2023, we utilized a combination approach of the MOSAIC methodology and then at times the 97.5 net load histogram and the 99th percentile net load histogram, because it, as you saw in slide 68, that on extreme days, the methodology of MOSAIC had the potential to undercover the amount of uncertainty that we needed to get us to the 95th percentile, or that 97.5% at the top side. I think I saw one question come in. So before I get to some results on what happened in summer and how it overall performed, I wanted to pause for a second, and I see one from the Energy Commission saying, does a centered 95% target for the uncertainty requirement presume a normal or balanced tail underlying the distribution? Can you expand on that more? I'm not sure if he's able to raise his hand. Okay, he wanted to take that into another area. So, all right, we can do that. All right, with that, I will go to slide 71. The next slide. Oh, I guess 135, sorry. So we have two results here from the summertime period. So these are looking at the analysis of 7/1 to 9/1 of 2023. And we stopped at 9/1 of 2023 because September during this particular season was not that hot. This graph on the left side shows you the percent coverage against the overall requirement. So ultimately, if you are getting a less average requirement and improving your overall coverage, you're going towards a better direction. If you are getting a higher average requirement and reducing your overall coverage, you could consider that a less desirable direction. So with that, we have a few colors over on the right-hand side that I will explain. We have the mosaic approach at the 97.5 percentile. We have optimal, right? I talked a little bit about switching criteria. So we had switching criteria to go to the 97.5 and the 99 net load histogram during certain key conditions where we saw that the coverage was poor in our analysis of 2022. Then we have the old optimal. So this was what was being done in the sum of the overall confidence bands of load, wind, and solar as a total instead of looking at it from a net load perspective. Then you have the net load histogram at the 97.5 percentile and the net load histogram at the 99th percentile, and kind of looks overall like a rainbow. The ones that you really want to watch are the red, which is the mosaic approach, and then the optimal, which was what was used during the summer of 2023. So one of the things that you see right off the bat for the all hours is the coverage of the old optimal was quite poor, with actually a lower average requirement. And this really was because you had more megawatts during the peak and the net load peak hours, but you didn't have enough coverage during those overnight hours, and that really drove the coverage of the old optimal down. So with that, you can focus in now on the three, right? The mosaic, the optimal, and then the net load histogram at the 97.5. And you see that the mosaic approach actually did a very good job for that all-hour coverage. If your target's 97.5, it was actually slightly above 97.5 at 98% coverage and had a lower average requirement. Even more so than the optimal, though the optimal also did better than the net load histogram approach. Next slide. To the peak and the net load peak hours for the California area. So this is hour ending 18 through 21. When you're taking an insurance policy out, you of course want to watch the time periods that are critical for you. One of those time periods that's critical for the California ISO is that peak and net load peak time period. So with that, we really wanted to dive into the same colors that you saw on the previous slide, but what ended up doing, how they ended up performing during the peak time period. So you see, again, the mosaic approach had good coverage. We're trying to get to that 97.5 percentile. You weren't quite there on the coverage side, but it actually had the highest coverage of the optimal and the net load histogram at the 97.5 level. You do see that the old optimal, that green, did provide you the highest coverage during that period of time. But the optimal that was used during this past summer's operation was at the 96th percentile and an average requirement about 3,100. So overall, the methodology that was used for that summer time period was really getting us to what we were hoping for, right? Like, what are we hoping for in the overall metrics? We want to see the percent coverage. We want to see it against the requirement. The one piece that's not in these metrics that's also really important to track is that informativeness variable, really looking at coverage, exceedance, some of the different components that you'll see come out as we continue to talk about uncertainty products. With that, let me summarize a little bit of what we're seeing in the current results from this summer's operations in the next slide. So ultimately, you see that the new RUC approach provided higher coverage than the net load histogram approach, and also much higher coverage than the old optimal summed confidence band approach when you're looking at all of the hours. When you consider hour ending 18 to 21, the gap increases, so you see even more coverage out of the new Mosaic approach than the net load histogram approach. You do see a little bit of a degradation to the old optimal, but ultimately performed well. The new RUC approach maintained a lower average requirement of 2,697 megawatts. I won't rattle off all the megawatts than the old histogram approach. And then in 2023, the results for the old RUC approach confirm the same conclusions of the overall coverage. You see that you had lack of coverage for those hours and you had too much of the requirement during the peak time period. Ultimately, the switching criteria offered comparable coverage and required a Mosaic, but the CAISO had a moderate summer. So one of the things that we're taking into consideration from this analysis is two things, and then I will pass it on, is one, we see that the approach really did assist us for this past summer's operations. Now we're watching how it's behaving during a different season pattern that we've been in since that September timeframe, like September, October, November, and how it's performing during that timeframe. And then the next thing is to take that into consideration of what's needed during more of the winter season versus the summer season. But then we're also considering with these results what it looks like for next summer. You see that the optimal approach really didn't give us that much gains. I think you have to watch it because we didn't have that big of an extreme heat summer in California like we did in 2022. But it may be that the criteria of going to net load histograms during certain key conditions doesn't provide that much benefit, and you might just run with the Mosaic approach overall. So with that, I'm going to pause and see if there's any questions at all while we're trying to evaluate and share with the stakeholder community what's going on in relation to estimating RUC uncertainty.
You have a question in queue?
Steve, you want to go ahead?
Is unmuted.
A couple questions. I'm wondering if you've done any, I don't know what it would be, simulations or something to try and see, you know, how things would work with a not quite so moderate summer. Like if we had the conditions that we've had, you know, like in 2020 or something, or 2022. And then the other question is, when you're looking at the RUC needs, one thing we did have trouble with this summer was when loads were high in the rest of EIM and the West. Did you look at how that potentially influenced the need for RUC and other, the uncertainty?
All right, I'll take them one at a time. So I'm going to go with the question of the moderate summer. I think one of the things, if we go back to the slide where we analyzed the 2022 summer, when you kind of saw simulating the 2022 summer, we really wanted to do that even before we decided what to do for the summer of 2023. And I think that that's a good slide, Steve, to look at of what it could look like if it wasn't so moderate. The hard part about those kind of simulations is when you put them into effect, right, you have to use what data would have been in the modeling technique at that point in time. And of course, you know, when you're trying to go through a 2022 event where you're 116 degrees in the temperature side for the inland areas, you don't have that in the model training set. But we saw that during those extreme heat events, that the model, the Mosaic model, did not perform coverage very well, nor did it have the requirement that was needed, which is why we had this switching criteria during conditions that we felt we needed to go to the net load histogram approach, whether it be a 97.5% or a 99%. And I just want to call out, when we're switching to that method, it doesn't mean that it's taking us to a 99% coverage. It's just trying to take us to get to the coverage that we're trying to get to, which is the 97.5 or the overall 95th percentile. So that hopefully helps. So we have simulated some of those extreme events, which is what led to the switching criteria.
Okay. Then the second question, which was about whether you've looked at like how uncertainty may be impacted, not just by uncertainty in the CAISO, but increased weather and demand outside of the CAISO.
Yeah, so one of the things that we look at for this is we really want to focus on the uncertainty that we need to cover the CAISO BAA or any BIA that we're forecasting uncertainty for. We do with FRP forecast uncertainty for all of the WEIM BAAs as well. So it is critical to focus on what is needed for the CAISO BAA and that you have the coverage that you need inside the CAISO to handle the CAISO uncertainty that's there. There may be circumstances that happen outside of the CAISO BAA, like Guillermo was talking about earlier today, where the desert Southwest was exceptionally hot this summer over many days, breaking many records. That's something that you can take into consideration as you're looking at the overall approach, but our goal is to cover our uncertainty at the 97.5 percentile in the CAISO footprint, because if we can cover our uncertainty to that insurance level, it will really help us overall, even if the West was super hot in other areas.
Okay, I'm trying to think this through. I guess what I was just wondering is, at least one of the things that July showed me is that there can be, changes to the uncertainty levels within the CAISO due to things happening outside of the CAISO. And I'm just asking whether there's any benefit to looking, like on days when it's predicted that the demand in the Southwest will be exceedingly high, or possibly, I don't know that we had it this last summer, but we have in the past where it's been really hot up in the Northwest, and whether that, increases the potential for, increases the uncertainty that exists in the CAISO system, just because it may impact either exports or imports.
I think that the important thing to note with this analysis is we're just looking at those three components. We're looking at load, wind, and solar. So we're not looking at anything outside of those three components to get us to that net load. There may be other uncertainties that exist, and I can let Guillermo speak to some of those as you look at the other load conformance products that are there. But ultimately, this approach that we're putting in is really just focused on, the CAISO BAA load and then wind and solar resources.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Those were good ones. All right, with that, I will pass it. I think I'm passing it off to Guillermo. Oh, there's one more question that popped up.
Yeah, hi, this is Dan from the Energy Authority again. So just a quick question, sort of the inverse of what Steve was just talking about. Is when doing the load conformance, should we just assume that this is being sort of applied evenly across all load aggregation points within the CAISO, or have you looked at the ability to say, identify that during certain hours there's going to be more uncertainty within SP15, and therefore we'll do higher load conformance in SP than NP, and sort of look at the benefits and maybe negatives of trying to parse things apart that way? I know that imbalance reserves, reliability capacity, if those go forward, are headed in that direction. But just curious if there's been any attempt with the current tools to get more granular with how the load conformance comes in.
Yeah, in the current tools, the load conformance is not more granular, but when you get into the DAME initiative and the DAME implementation, that's when you gain that additional granularity. The methodology is just like for FRP. They do start at the ground level and then go up, right? So we look at the uncertainty of each individual resource ID forecast, and the same with the different regions that are on the load side.
Maybe you do get some weighting to different regions depending on their uncertainty and just covering more of that, but not necessarily adjusting that sort of manually for one region versus another.
Yep, that's a correct summary.
Okay, thanks.
All right, anything else? I'm sure we'll be back to talk about this more in the future. And with that, I will think I'm passing it off to Guillermo to continue on.
Thank you, Amber. Okay, next slide, please. And we are still on the topic of the rock adjustment. Amber has explained all the details about the science behind the estimation of the rock adjustment. Now, the next slides cover what are the implications of having those into the actual market, right? This becomes no more than an input into the day-ahead market, and there are implications of using those inputs at that level. To put in context, here is a picture capturing what we have been doing over a period of time, effectively in 2022, regarding the rock adjustments. And it's a trend on a daily average of how much rock adjustments we have for 2022 and 2023. And there are some interesting points to get more details of what was going on. If we start as early as the September 2022, you can see that we have the highest levels of conformance in rock in the September timeframe, when we have up to 10,000 megawatts of adjustments. Not surprisingly, that was during the middle of the heat wave. Then naturally the levels decline as we enter non-summer months. Then effectively starting in the first quarter of 2023, we started this pilot program. We really wanted to go as lean as possible on the rock adjustments, assess what do we gain, what do we lose if we no longer use those rock adjustments. We ran a couple of one-day pilot testing, basically no rock adjustments. Let's see how well positioned the system is for the real-time operations. We went back, analyzed how systems perform, and based on that information, you can see that there is like a missing space anywhere between May through the beginning of July. And that is when effectively we used zero rock adjustments. And the criteria was that we feel confident that we could do that as long as we were not in these high demand conditions. So the criteria was that if the peak demand was under 35,000 megawatts, and we wouldn't apply the conformance. We took that month or so of information, analyzed what resources were not committed, how tight the real-time condition was handling the changing dynamics of the real-time, and things seemed to be okay. Then we started reaching demands over 35,000 megawatts, and that is the time when we already have the logic to use the imbalance reserve calculation. So that is when you see that in the second half of July, we start using relatively high levels. And from there, even past summer, all the way up to now, you can see that the level of rock adjustments have been, on average, about 27,100 megawatts. And that is all the period in which we have been using the new calculation of the imbalance reserve type of estimation. Now, can we move to the next slide, please? This is the same information, but on an hourly profile. One line means 1 month, and this is only for 2023. Just to give you a sense of not only the magnitude of the rock adjustment, but also when in the day they are applied to. And if you see the dotted lines, for instance, are basically 0 because these are exactly the period of times when we were very aggressively applying the pilot program and wanted to basically use 0 conformance. And any other month, you're going to see non-zero values depending on the time of the year. The family of curves that are in the different ranges of blue stand for the early in the year conformances that tend to be peaking for the peak hours, for the peaking conditions. Small quantities in shoulder hours, small quantities in the morning peaks, and increasing gradually up to reaching the peak conditions. That is historically the profile we have been using for rock adjustments. With the implementation of the imbalance reserve type of estimation, you end up with this other family of curves that are on the top in either green or purple. And you can see that, yeah, first thing is they are significantly higher than the other ones used earlier in the year. The profile is also different because we have 2 peaks, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and the values may be reaching relatively higher levels. For non-summer months, we are talking about up to 5,000 megawatts of rock adjustment. And relative to the size of the demand that we have, just to put things in context, naturally they become a higher share of the demand that we have to meet in the day-ahead market. Next slide, please. This is a different way to summarize over the period of time. This gives you a more coarse view. And it's per month. In addition to the bars that amount to the average rock adjustments for the month, we also have some black markers. These are the percentage of the rock adjustments relative to the value of the demand. So if you have a demand of 20,000 megawatts and your rock adjustment is, let's say, 5,000 megawatts, that means that the rock adjustment is 25% relative to the demand, just to give you a sense. And if you compare that over time, you can see the trend here that prior to the implementation of the new calculation, the percentages of the rock adjustments relative to the size of the demand that we were expecting to meet and were relatively small, no higher than 4%. Once we start using consistently the rock adjustments, now that becomes much larger share of the total demand, in some cases representing 3, 4, 5-fold increases relative to historical information. For instance, in November, you can see that the rock adjustments on average was about 2,800 megawatts, and the relative share of the rock adjustment was about 12%. And the smaller the demand, the higher the share of the rock adjustment is going to be. If you compare, for instance, October, November 2023 versus the same month of 2022, you can see that the current calculation is providing about 5 times higher requirements, relative requirements to the 2022. Next slide, please. What are the implications? And let's now move into the practical implications of having these requirements used in the market. One is that having additional demand to be met in the rock process is going to lead to not only more, but a slightly different profile of commitments. And we have seen through the analysis that we have done that in some cases there is some shifting of the supply mix of how we are meeting the day ahead projected demand that includes the rock adjustment. We may rely more on longer start units rather than fast start units, just to be able to meet this more sustained rock adjustment over a longer period of time. And that naturally may mean that some resources may run uneconomically, typically in the middle of the day, because you cannot shut them down. So they have to run even at these low conditions of demand and prices. And the consequence is that we are going to see an increase in the bit cost recovery. If we have that generation that cannot be shut down in order to meet the needs for later in the day, that means that in some hours, typically when we overlap with a plentiful solar production, we are going to create more conditions for oversupply. And we have seen that typically in the weekends that becomes more exacerbated because now we have more online capacity and we have to reduce more renewable resources. And another consequence is that by having these higher requirements potentially leading to more commitments, we are going to put more capacity online in the real-time market than what was projected in the integrated forward market. That doesn't see any of these ROC adjustments. The consequence of that is that there will be potentially lower prices in the real time given the excess or additional supply that we committed through the ROC process. And that is going to create a price divergence between the day ahead and the real-time market. Next slide, please. This is the bit cost recovery, and I believe Mark was asking in a previous workshop that we had regarding bit cost recovery, what was the reason to see the increase in the bit cost recovery. I promise that we would cover that topic here, and this is one of the slides that shows and summarizes that the answer to that question. We can see that in the last 5 months, effectively, we have seen this steep increase in the bit cost recovery effectively in the ROC process. That is a process that is going to be directly impacted by the ROC adjustments because it's going to require that we commit additional resources. Some of them are going to be uneconomically dispatched, and therefore is going to lead to this bit cost recovery. I have to say that this also overlaps with the natural conditions of the summer. So I would take with some caution conclusions about June and July because that is still with high demands, and if you compare that versus the previous year, they are kind of comparable. It's more about the post-summer conditions where you can see that this is a clearly divergence relative to historical standards. If you compare, for instance, October, November 2023 versus the same month of 2022, that may give you some reference of historically, typically, what has been the range of bit cost recovery for similar conditions. And naturally, you're going to see that, yes, there is an increase in bit cost recovery as we are using additional ROC adjustments. Next slide, please. What does this bring us to? Well, Amber has already explained all the calculations, the estimates, the logic that is behind those estimates to guide the utilization of the ROC adjustment. We understand that this has created higher requirements that potentially were expected, at least for the post-summer conditions. And as of now, we are still assessing what is the right configuration to determine the ROC adjustments given the conditions that we are dealing with in the post-summer months. And we have to recognize that the conditions we are dealing with in the middle of the summer heat waves like July this year or September last year are going to be inherently different to the conditions that we may be facing in the middle of the winter in terms of capacity, ramp capability needs. And that is the current assessment that we are doing, how we need to tune the configuration of the calculation to be more reflective of the varying level of the risk that is posed by the net load uncertainty for these non-summer months. We can safely say that for these non-summer months, we expect that the level of risk may be simply lower. Potentially, we may result in a configuration that is going to result also in reduced requirements relative to what we currently have. And we have been doing this assessment as we speak, and we're expecting that as of next week, we're going to effectuate some of these configuration changes to adjust it to a level of risk that may be more reflective of the conditions that we're dealing with the non-summer months. Naturally, you would expect to see lower requirements effectively starting next week. And as I indicated at the beginning, this is a work in progress. We continue to tune and ensure that first, we can objectively estimate the uncertainty that we have to incorporate through the market. We want to create these market signals, have a defensible, scientifically estimated way to get the uncertainty requirements, but also recognizing the practicality that it has to align with the profile risk that we are dealing with, the period of time we are dealing with. So it's still a work in progress. That's all what we have for this specific topic. So before we move on to the next one, we may have some time for questions, please. And I see Dan.
Hi, Guillermo. Dan Williams from the Energy Authority again. Great presentation here. Happy to see all the follow-up on this as well. On the slide 1 or 2 back, we were kind of talking about the implications of use of higher levels of load bias. I'm wondering if the ISO has the ability to go back to that 2019 price performance study that put a ton of work into and crank these newer numbers through that study to look at sort of how just effectively the significantly higher amount of load bias is increasing the problems that we saw with that study relative to just divergence between IFM and real-time prices. Because kind of the last bullet, I guess, that was missing there is if real-time prices are suppressed, then that's not just about real-time prices, it's about what impact does that have on how entities participate in the virtuals market and how entities choose to bid demand and supply into the IFM. Maybe some things that we can look at in the price formation enhancements initiative when looking at maybe some different tools that could be associated with load bias that could help bring that price signal when it's used. But I just would encourage or maybe hope to see that we can revisit some of the work that was done in the past in light of this information and see if it can help teach us anything about areas to improve.
Yeah, I remember very well that effort that we had done, and it was a very long, exhaustive analysis that we have to carry on this. And I believe naturally there may be an opportunity to accommodate that through the price formation discussions we are doing. So we will take into account and see if there are merits and naturally fits into any of the ongoing efforts that we have down the road.
And just one other thing is that I appreciate the drilling down on the BCR. I'm wondering too, though, if there's an ability to drill down on congestion impacts from having to sort of fix or add to the IFM results, and whether some of the trends in congestion imbalance offsets and some of the other congestion-related charges are the increased trends that we're seeing in those significantly higher levels of them are in part driven by some of the load conformance and maybe how that is informing the unit commitment or not. And I guess that probably just depends on to what extent it actually impacts the unit commitment relative to what came out of IFM.
Oh, wow, yeah, that's an interesting concept. I cannot commit to take a full-blown of that type of analysis, but maybe we can spot check one of the critical cases just to see if there is a proof of concept there to further expand. Yeah, I see your point, Dan, and I think that's a very interesting idea.
Yeah, just thinking these things that the entities that are trying to interact with the market, kind of need to know what levers are being pushed and pulled outside of just the kind of supply and demand clearing in IFM, and then what happens in real time. They kind of need to know what things are coming in and maybe disrupting is too strong of a word, but just kind of moving the playing field around a little bit in order for them to engage most efficiently with the two markets that live on either side of these adjustments. So appreciate the work here and just look forward to continuing to find, kind of policy initiatives to squeeze this information into and learn from it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dan. I really appreciate these very thought-provoking ideas that you are putting forward. Michelle, do we have any other questions maybe on the phone?
There are no additional questions at the moment.
Okay, then we can really move to the last two topics of this afternoon. That is the emergency assistance transfer and then the gas and market cost. And I will pass it over to Katie.
Thanks, Guillermo. Let's go to the next slide, please. We might need to move a couple slides through. Keep going. Keep going. Perfect. All right. Thanks so much. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Katie Wickler. I'm a Senior Market Engineering Specialist at the CAISO in the Market Analysis team. Just a couple quick topics to wrap us up here this afternoon. The first one I'll cover is the assistance energy transfer. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So we kicked off the assistance energy transfer process effective earlier this summer, July 1st, 2023. And the idea behind this process is to effectively allow WEIM entities to provide reliability benefits, assistance energy transfers to other BAAs who might be deficient in capacity or flexibility. So we have a process by which these BAAs can request to be sort of opted into this process. And we have that all detailed in our business practice manuals. But the general idea is that these are requests that are submitted some days ahead of time, about 5 business days in advance of the effective start date that's being requested. We did introduce an option to request sort of an emergency opt-in within that 5 business day time frame, sort of if the conditions warrant and if the processing time frame is feasible. I'd point you to the BPMs for more information on that. But let's go to the next slide and look at a little bit more of the details. So here's just an overview of the entities within the WEIM that have opted into the Assistance Energy Transfer Program since its inception in July. This goes through the end of October 2023. So you can see a total of 5 BAAs have opted in, including the CAISO, a couple trading days in August, and then a trading day or 2 as well in mid-October. If we go to the next slide. So corresponding with this assistance energy transfer product is effectively a settlement surcharge. These surcharges are assessed only when the entity fails the RSE and is opted into the program. So this just sort of shows a daily breakdown of the total amount of AET surcharge assessed across the market. And so we can see that the highest total amount over the summer months occurred in September. Specifically, one day, September 27th, had a particularly high total amount of AET surcharge. Let's go to the next slide. That was everything I had on assistance energy transfer, pretty short and sweet, but I guess we can pause and see if there's any questions from folks. All right, not seeing any, let's move on. So these are some of the typical metrics we like to cover: gas and power prices and CAISO market index costs. I think it's particularly interesting to take a look at where prices are trending now, considering how gas prices were elevated around this time last year. So this chart, I like to show sort of a longer term view of the 2 primary gas trading hubs in California, the PG&E Citygate and the SoCal Citygate hubs. For the 2-year period, the 3-year period. we can see that that pretty large spike around December of last year. Since then, prices have been relatively lower, some volatility over the summer and into the fall, but in general, we're kind of at lower levels than we saw last summer moving into the fall months of 2022. Let's go to the next slide, please. This shows just a bit more of a zoomed in view specifically of this past summer for a handful of the main gas trading hubs in the Western US. So I included Henry Hub here, not part of the Western US gas hub region, but just as a sort of reference to folks, as Henry Hub is often used as a sort of reference when we're talking about gas prices. We can see particularly the SoCal Citygate price, somewhat followed by the PG&E Citygate prices, did reach some elevated levels over the summer and into the fall trading in October, kind of getting up to that $10, $12 per MMBTU range. The rest of the hubs stayed relatively lower, hovering around the $3 to $6 per MMBTU mark, and these are next day gas prices that we're showing here. Let's go to the next slide. Another interesting point of reference is to look at the gas future prices that are trading. And so these are showing future gas prices for the month of November and December, as well as January of next year. And what we're looking at here is the trading period starting at the beginning of the summer, beginning of June, all the way through the end of October. So we can sort of see, you know, that as we progress through summer trading and get into the early parts of fall, some of these hubs are trending upwards, particularly the SoCal and the PG&E Citygate regions. We also see some spikes in the Pacific Northwest gas regions as well. Again, Henry Hub there is a reference, staying relatively flat and static as we move through the trading months. Next slide, please. All right, shifting gears a little bit to talk about bilateral power prices. So these are the prices that are traded on the bilateral market outside of the CAISO market, and there's a couple main hubs, trading hubs that we look at to sort of get a sense of where these prices are trading. So we'll typically look at the Mid-Columbia trading hub in the north, the Palo Verde trading hub in the south, and then we also put in the NP and SP15 bilateral trading hubs as a sort of reference. We did see that generally over the summer, the prices were trading lower until we hit that mid-August spike, where the Mid-C and the Palo Verde prices did spike well above $750, and I think reached almost the $1,000 cap there. Aside from that spike, the trading was relatively static for the rest of the summer and into the fall, with some moderate spikes in recent trading, but nothing that got to the level of what we saw in mid-August. Next slide, please. All right, here's a similar picture of the futures prices. So sort of showing the same thing that I showed for gas. These are futures prices trading for November, December, and January through the summer period of trading. These are specifically showing on-peak bilateral power prices. So we're seeing that sort of towards the latter end of summer, the futures for particularly December and January started to climb above that $100 per megawatt hour mark, specifically in the Mid-C hub. We're also seeing that in the rest of the hubs as well. Mid-C a little bit elevated from the rest of the pack there. Next slide, please. All right, shifting gears a little bit away from index prices, just a couple of slides to cover on daily market costs. So these are the total summation of costs as transacted in the CAISO markets on a daily basis. So the blue lines here are showing the total cost per day. The red dashed line is showing the average cost, and those y-axes are corresponding to each of those scales. So we're showing here the daily market costs since the beginning of June all the way through the end of October. We did see a spike in mid-August, reaching up to about an average cost of $300 per megawatt hour. After that point, the total daily costs settled down a bit and sort of remained under that $100 average range. Next slide, please. So same data, just showing this in sort of a different aggregated fashion. Here, this is on a monthly total basis. Again, we see that that spike for last December corresponding to the gas volatility that was observed. Since then, we've sort of been coming down a bit, and we were sort of at lower levels for this past summer as compared to the previous summer. Next slide, please. Again, this is the same data, just rolled up a little bit more on the quarterly basis. So here we see that the total costs for Q3 were about $3 billion in total lower than the Q3 2022 costs. That works out to about $50 per megawatt hour lower on average comparison. So relatively lower this past quarter compared to last. Next slide. This is my last one here, just kind of like this comparison to show how these costs, these monthly totals are sort of trending year over year. So here we're showing a trend from 2018 through 2023. Of course, we can observe the higher costs associated with the December 2022 and January 2023 gas volatility. Since then, the monthly totals for 2023 have been sort of lower or at least consistent with totals from previous years. So costs sort of settled down a little bit after that volatility last winter. I think that's all that I have, so happy to open it up to questions. Otherwise, I'll pass it back to Brenda.
There are no questions in queue.
Thank you, Katie. We will go ahead and wrap this up for the Market Performance and Planning Forum. So for reference, we have reposted the slides on the user group reoccurring meetings. And also on the next slide, we will talk about the new blog posting that was just posted for enhancing resource adequacy. Feel free to check that out. And then on the next slide, we are showing our dates for the forum for 2024. It's also, these dates are tentative, but we are hoping to shoot for these dates, March 14th for first quarter, June 27th, second quarter, September 26th, third quarter, and then December 12th for the fourth quarter of the Market Performance Planning Forum. Thanks so much for everyone who sent us a few comments on chat. We appreciate it, and we wish you a happy holidays and be safe. Passing back to my event producer for closing. Thank you.